This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good morning everyone. Shalom Aleichem. Welcome everyone. Bez Hashem, we're going to have a wonderful time. We want to thank Rabbi Harakiah for organizing such a beautiful trip, and we look forward to having an amazing time together. I just want to bring to your attention, here we're in Greece. We know in Lashon Kodesh, in Hebrew, the word for Greece is Yavan, Yud Vav Nun. Yud Vav Nun. So before we even begin, we should study this word, Yud Vav Nun. First of all, the word has a gematria of 66. Yud Vav Nun, 66. We know the Yevanim came into the Heichal. Heichal is 65. So Maral says the reason the Yevanim were able to dominate the Heichal, because Heichal is 65, Yavan is 66. But the Yevanim made one fatal mistake. Maral says that in the word Heichal, Heichal is not really 65. He says really there's a double Yud. Why is there a double Yud? Because the Tseirei automatically is a Yud, Maral says. So the Yud that's there is an additional Yud. What's the additional Yud of Heichal? And that's the secret of today's trip, of this week's trip. If you look at the word Yavan, it's a very interesting word, the way it's written out, the appearance of it. It's one-dimensional word. Yud is a line, Vav is a longer line, final known as an even longer line. It's one-dimensional. That's what the Yevanim were about. They're one-dimensional. In other words, they saw the physical universe, but they didn't see anything behind it. They probed the depths of the wisdom of the physical universe, but they never came to the secret behind it, that it's divinely originated. So they're one-dimensional. And our job in life is to be more than one-dimensional. We see the physical universe, we see the wisdom of Hashem, but we have to look further. We have to say, Re'u mi bara ela. Where did it all come from? And same thing with the trip. This is not a one-dimensional trip. It's not just everything, all the accommodations will be beautiful, wonderful, but the main avodah of the trip is to see beyond that, to see what do we learn from the Greeks, what mistakes could we learn not to make, and Be'ezus Hashem, Klal Yisrael takes it to a much deeper dimension, and with Hashem's help, we'll be able to expand our horizons beyond the one dimension of Yavan. So it's a pleasure to see everybody, and looking forward to having an amazing time together. Thank you very much. Okay, good morning everyone. We want to thank our guide, Ovadia Solomon. Thank you very much. And Avigdar. That's your name? Victor. Okay, good job. We're here in Athens. I always wanted to speak in a shul in Athens. Athens is considered the seat of the wisdom of the Greeks. There's a famous Gemara in Bechairos, Chesam and Beis. The Gemara tells us of a conversation between Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya and the Chachmei Atuna. Okay? The Chachmei Atuna are the sages of Athens. And they have many discussions. And we're going to bring out two very interesting points. One important point is that the understanding of the 3 weeks is gleaned from a conversation between the Chachmei Atuna and Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya. Now, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya would be the last person you would ever expect to have ecumenical debates with other religions. Because Chazal tell us, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya, Ashrei Yoladetoi, that from the moment he was born, his mother did not allow his ear to hear anything but Torah. So he was never exposed to anything other than the Torah itself. Yet he's always the one in Shas, whether it's the Gemara in Chagiga or the Gemara in Bechairos, he's always the one who debates various apikarsim, minim, tzedokim, and a very interesting debate ensued between Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya and the Chachmei Atuna. So I want to share with you one question the sages of Athens presented Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya, and this is really the source of the Bein HaMetzarim. It goes like this. They brought him 2 eggs. They were both white. And they asked him, Amrulei, Hai dezagta uchmati v'hai dezagta chivarti. One of these eggs came from a black hen. One of these eggs came from a white hen. Tell me which egg came from the white hen, which egg came from the black hen. Whereupon Rabbi Yehoshua ben Chananya responded, here are 2 pieces of cheese. By the way, that's why Avi made sure there were at least 2 eggs by breakfast and at least 2 pieces of cheese. Because in Athens, you have to think about this. Everything was cheshbon. It wasn't pasha. He said, there are 2 pieces of cheese. Which one came from the black goat? Which one came from the white goat? That's the conversation. Says the Maharsha, what is this conversation? What's Rabbi Yehuda ben Hanania being asked? What's his response? Says the Maharsha, anybody know, whoever gets the answer will get an extra Greek egg. Okay? How long does it take for a hen to incubate an egg? What is the process? What is the process? We're going to read about it in this week's Haftarah. 21 days. The incubation of an egg is 21 days. Very good, Rav Nasan. 21 days. By the way, the learning should be Le'iloi Nishmas, Rabbanit Koal's father, Yirmiyahu Zisol ben Reb Chaim B'Gan Eden Teimenu Chasai. The incubation of an egg is 21 days. Says the Maharsha, there are two 21-day periods in the calendar. One is the Drai Vachen, the 3 weeks. One is from Rosh Hashanah to Hoshana Rabbah. But they seem like diametrically antithetical times. They're opposite times. The 3 weeks is a time of perennials. From Rosh Hashanah to Hoshana Rabbah is a time of Rachamim V'Ratzain. So what they were asking was, how do we understand this? From one God came 2 different periods of 21 days, one of punishment and one of Rachamim? To which Rabbi Yehuda ben Hanania said, no, it's Kulai Rachamim, it's all mercy. The same way on Yom Kippur we have 2 goats. One goes to Azazel, one goes into the Beis HaMikdash. But the objective of both is to bring Rachamim to Klal Yisrael. So too, not only from Hashanah to Hoshana Rabbah brings Rachamim to Klal Yisrael, but from Shavuos B'Tammuz to Tisha B'Av, it also brings Rachamim to Klal Yisrael. This is one of the Yesodos of the 3 weeks. Now I want to share with you one more question that they asked Rabbi Yehuda ben Hanania. They asked him, how long does it take for a snake, how long is the snake's pregnancy? I know you've all been wondering about that. You didn't sleep well last night. You wanted to know, how long is a snake's pregnancy? So they said, the Chachmei Atuna said, 3 years. Rabbi Yehuda ben Hanania says, not true. 7 years. So they asked Rabbi Yehuda ben Hanania, what do you mean? We did an experiment. It only took 3 years. He said, you're fools. The snakes were already 4 years pregnant when you started the experiment. So they asked, what do you mean? Because animals don't live with their mate when they're pregnant. And these snakes were living with their mate. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Hanania says, the snake is the only exception. Okay? That's the Gemara. What in the world is this conversation? Okay, and this is dovetailing what we started with at breakfast. The Chachamim of Athens, the Chachamim of Greece, only accepted what they could measure and weigh and count. They only accepted science that was understandable to their human minds, but they did not have any connection to divine information. Masha'en Kain, the sages of Klal Yisrael, we have a tradition from Sinai. We know the snake was cursed. So even though the elephant and the leopard and the rhinoceros, all these chayos, it takes them 7 years to have a child. It takes them, 3 years to have a child. But because of the curse of the snake, Hashem added to the snake another 4 years. Now the sages of Yavan, they're one-dimensional. They're Yavan. They're just one line. They don't have access to that information. They're only able to extrapolate based on natural wisdom, and that is, chayos take 3 years. But we, of course, are not one-dimensional. We have a tradition from Sinai. We believe there's a story that happened in Gan Eden, and the snake did an avera, and Hashem cursed the snake, and because of that curse, 4 years was added to the snake. So this is a famous debate that took place, I don't know about in this shul, but in this general area in Athens, between Rabbi Yehuda ben Hanania and the Chachmei Atuna. For more information, go to Bechayros, Chesam and Beis. You'll see many conversations between Rabbi Yehuda ben Hanania and the Chachmei Atuna. Thank you. Okay, now ancient history. Okay, we're gonna speak now about some ancient history. So a little trivia. What happened exactly 1,000 years after Bnei Yisrael left Mitzrayim? 1,000 years. was the main rise of Alexander the Great. So let's see, how many years were we in the Midbar?
40.
That you know. How many years were we in Eretz Yisrael before they built the Bayis Rishon? Nobody knows. How many?
14 years before New Zealand.
Yeah.
52 years.
Right. 440 years. 440. 40 in the Midbar, and 440 until they built Bayis Rishon. Exactly 440. The Navi says the day Shlomo built Bayis Rishon was 480 years. That's a pasuk in the Navi. So it's 40 in the Midbar and 440. Bayis Rishon stood how long? 410. So what are we up to? 40, 480, and 410. 890. 890. How many years in Bavel? We're up to 960. The Gemara says in Avodah Zarah that 34 years into Bayis Sheni, Alexander the Great rose to power. So we're now up to 994. 6 years later was the main ascendancy of Alexander the Great. Exactly 1,000 years after Yetzias Mitzrayim. We're going to speak a lot about Alexander the Great because until Alexander the Great, there were small Greek commonwealths. There was no centralized Greek power. But now I'm going to tell you a story with Alexander the Great and Reb Chaim Kanievsky. So you say, I don't think Reb Chaim Kanievsky ever met Alexander the Great. Lots of people went to Bnei Brak. Alexander the Great never made it. I'll tell you a story. Basically, there's a chassan and a kala. Right before the wedding, the chassan came down with Yana Machla. The couple came to the Ger Rebbe. What should they do? Should they go through with the wedding? So Ger Rebbe says, I can't tell you what to do. I don't know. There's only one person in this world who could paskin. Go to Reb Chaim Kanievsky. So they come to Reb Chaim Kanievsky with the most unusual request anyone ever asked of a gadol. The girl said, since he's sick, Nebuch, if I'm going to break off the engagement, who's going to want to marry him? It's not right for me to break it off. And he said, since I'm sick, it's not right for me to ruin this girl's life. So I have to break it up. So she wanted it, and he didn't want it. What? You mean she should have killed him? That's always an eitzah, okay? So that was the question. That was the question. So Reb Chaim Kanievsky says, I give you a bracha, you have to go through with it, you have to get married, and you're going to have children, and it's going to be b'bracha v'hatzlacha. So right before the wedding, Rebbe Yohanan told Reb Chaim, you're taking this wedding on your shoulders, you should really go to the wedding and be mesameach. So Reb Chaim Kanievsky goes to the wedding. It's a very rare occasion for Reb Chaim to go to the wedding. He went to the wedding, and everybody sang, Yom Yimei Melech Tois, fine. So finally somebody had the guts to ask Reb Chaim, how did he take it on his shoulders to go through with the marriage? Says Reb Chaim, I learned it from Alexander the Great. Where? It's a medrash in Parshas Noach. A medrash in Parshas Noach. Medrash goes like this. Alexander the Great wanted to learn wisdom, so he went to the community in the area of Papaya. In Papaya, the following din Torah came to the Caesar of Papaya. You had a guy who sold an ancient ruin. In the ruin, the buyer found a treasure. The buyer says, I bought the ruin. I didn't buy the treasure. I'm coming to return the treasure. And the seller said, I sold everything. I didn't think what was in it. I want him to have it. I sold everything. So the Caesar of Papaya said that the seller wants to give it. The buyer doesn't feel he should buy it. My idea is like this. The son of the seller should marry the daughter of the buyer, and they should both enjoy it. Why? Because when two people want to be mavater, it's always going to be a win-win situation. When two people who want to give in, each one wants to do what's best for the other, it's always a win-win. Says Reb Chaim, when I saw the kala wanted to do what was good for the chassan, and the chassan wanted to do what was good for the kala, I learned from Alexander the Great that they should dafka marry each other, and they're going to have banim of nei banim. By the way, the Caesar of Papaya asked Alexander the Great, what would you paskin? Alexander said, I would kill the seller, I would kill the buyer, and I would take the money. So they said to Alexander, does it rain in your country? So he said, yeah. He said, I can't imagine it rains. In your country, there's no zechus that the rain should fall. And Alexander the Great was very touched and enamored by this psak. And from Alexander the Great, Reb Chaim Kanievsky derived halacha l'maisa, that if you have a situation where both parties want to do what's best for the other, it's going to be a win-win outcome. So that's a very important lesson, if there is one, that we could learn from Alexander the Great. In the year 1000, exactly, from the time we left Mitzrayim. Okay, thank you. Okay, good morning, everyone. Who's having a good time so far? Not bad, not bad. Okay, so let's start with the beginning. As we mentioned in one of the shuls, the Greek Empire, as an empire, really began with Alexander the Great 1,000 years after we left Mitzrayim. There is a famous account of Alexander's conquest of Israel and Jerusalem, recorded in the Gemara in Yuma and Daf Samach Tes. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Gemara. The Gemara says that when Alexander entered the gates of Yerushalayim and he invaded Eretz Yisrael, he is welcomed by Shimon HaTzadik appears before him, and the Gemara says that when Alexander saw the face of Shimon HaTzadik, he fell to the ground, he bowed down, and he said, "This very face always appears to me in battle and brings me victory." Ad kan l'shoin HaGemara. All the Gemara tells us is Shimon HaTzadik, who by the way was Shimon HaTzadik Haya Mishiyarei Knesses Hagdola, which means he's from the very last members of the Anshe Knesses Hagdola. Now this is very important to know, because we mentioned Alexander rises to power 1,000 years after we left Mitzrayim, at the very same time that Malachi passes away, that Nehemiah passes away, that Chagai and Zechariah pass away. Meaning, upon the cessation of Nevuah, that is when Alexander the Great rises in power. When Alexander rises, Nevuah ceases. When Alexander rises, Avodah Zarah ceases. This is a very important historic piece of information. In fact, we're going to see, based on Seder Olam, that from the rise of Alexander the Great, there's something called Minyan Shtaros. That Shtaros are now documented and dated based on the rise of Alexander, which is really the cessation of prophecy, which is really the cessation of Avodah Zarah. In any event, that's all the Gemara tells us. The Gemara says Alexander sees Shimon HaTzadik, but in Josephus adds a very interesting piece of information. And the reason the Gemara doesn't record this, it's not that the Gemara is contradicting this, it's just not relevant for the Gemara, but every Jew must be aware of what Josephus writes about the encounter of Alexander the Great and Shimon HaTzadik. Namely, Shimon HaTzadik brings Alexander to the Beis HaMikdash. And when he brought him into the Beis HaMikdash, he showed him something. He showed him. Now, by the way, Josephus writes, and the Gemara also says that he's dressed in the Shemaina Begadim, he's dressed in the garments of the Kohen Gadol, and he brought him to the Beis HaMikdash, and they showed him Sefer Daniel. And what does it say in Sefer Daniel? In a few places in Sefer Daniel, it predicts, it prophesies the sudden rise to power of Alexander the Great and his defeat of King Darius, the king of Persia. If you remember, the Gemara in Avodah Zarah says that Alexander rises to power 34 years after the second Beis HaMikdash was built. That's Avodah Zarah, Daf Tes. There are 2 or 3 references to Alexander the Great in Sefer Daniel. The first one is in Perek Zayin Pasuk Vav. Does anybody remember what animal in the vision of Daniel represented Greece? So the first nation, Babel, is compared to a lion. Very good. I'm happy we have yeshiva-educated people who learned in yeshiva for many years but don't know anything about Sefer Daniel. Okay, so what does it say in Sefer? By the way, okay, I won't say anything. Now, in Perek Zayin, in Sefer Daniel, the Bavel is compared to the lion. Paras is compared to the bear. And Greece is compared to the leopard, namer. Now, just to defend us B'nai Yeshiva that we don't learn Navi, first of all, yeshivas are non-for-profit organizations, so they don't really. And besides that, Al Pi Kabbalah, the Baal HaLeshem says that Dikduk and the Psukim are more like the outer shell of the Torah instead of the inner core. So therefore, there's some danger that if you put too much emphasis on that, you could be led astray if you don't have grounding in the core, which is a Torah Shabbat Peh. But even so, Kol Talmid Chacham Tzarech Leida Kol Chaf Dalet Tzram. In any event, Daniel sees the vision of the leopard. Basar Dina Chazis Haves Va'aru Achori Kinomer. Now this leopard had how many wings? Who remembers? 4 wings. Why 4 wings? Now Alexander died prematurely. How old? He rises to power at 20 years old, and he passes away at 32. He was likely poisoned, but he passes away at 32. This leopard has 4 wings. Ultimately, Alexander's power is divided among 4 generals. Talmai took Egypt. Seleucus took Assyria and Babylon. Antigonus took Persia and Asia Minor. Philip, Alexander's brother, took... Okay, good afternoon everyone. We're driving through the streets of Corfu. So I want to give you some background about one of the important halachic topics that is relevant to Corfu, and that is the etrog Corfu. In 1809, the Corfu etrog became one of the most well-used etrogim throughout the Jewish world. It began to be used in Poland, in Ukraine, in Lithuania, even though the one who came out most vehemently against the Corfu etrog was none other than the Chassam Sofer himself. And the reason why the Chassam Sofer came out against the Corfu etrog is primarily because Chassam Sofer felt, and there's a certain degree of uncertainty about this, but the Chassam Sofer felt that just like kosher birds, even if it meets all the requirements of a kosher animal, nevertheless, if there's no positive Mesorah that the bird is kosher, we don't eat it. The same thing with the Daled Minim. Unless there's a positive Mesorah that the etrog is kosher, even though there's no reason to assume it's pasul. It has a pitum, it has blitais, it has mitz, it has all the qualities of an etrog. But because there was no definitive Mesorah, the Chassam Sofer was roish l'chol hamefakbekim be'etrog Corfu. Even though it began to be used, actually we know that the Corfu etrog was used outside of Poland, even by the Rabbi Yehuda already in 1785. We know that Rabbi Yitzchak of Berditchev used the Corfu etrog. Harav HaKadosh Mulublin used the Corfu etrog, and that was primarily because there was a war in France, and the avenues of what had been considered until then the premium etrog in the world, which was the Yanova etrog, which came from Calabria, that was no longer available. And now the etrog of choice out of necessity was the Corfu etrog. And as mentioned, the Chassam Sofer came out most vehemently about it for the reason of there was no positive Mesorah. Other Gedolim had different issues with the Corfu etrog. For example, Reb Shlomo Kluger held that there was a shaila whether about the genealogy, the ancestry of the Corfu etrog, whether there was a shaila of Morkov in the Corfu etrog. Now in halacha, there's a difference between etrog Morkov and an etrog who has harkava in the ancestry. So while an etrog Morkov may be problematic, if there is some admixture in the ancestry, that may be less of an issue. So now, if you want to be able to use the Corfu etrog, you need to take care of basically 5 issues. Number 1, the poskim that allowed the Corfu etrog, they had to show that there's no chashash of harkava. Or, for example, the Beis Ephraim held that even if there is a chashash harkava, the Corfu etrog was still kosher. You needed to show that a Mesorah is not needed for etrogim. And based on the fact that the Rabbi Yehuda used it, and the Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Ditchev used it, and the Rav of Lublin used it, that was the basis to be able to use the Corfu etrog. Now, as it is well known, in Chabad, they hold the Yanav Esrog is like one of the Aseret HaDibros. They hold that when Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Har Sinai, Hashem told Moshe to take a Yanav Esrog. That's what they say. So they asked, well, wait a second. Reb Levi Yitzchak Bar Ditchev used the Corfu Esrog. And the Rebbe Rashab said, Reb Levi Yitzchak Bar Ditchev, everybody knows that a seed from Calabria blew in the wind all the way to Corfu and produced one Yanav Esrog here in Corfu. So that's how they were melets. That's how they were mamlets on the Reb Levi Yitzchak Bar Ditchev using the Corfu Esrog. Actually, when the Tzemach Tzedek heard about the Corfu Esrog, he said if he would have the capacity, he would take a Corfu Esrog, he would wrap it in a talus made by a machine, and he would throw both of them into a fire. In other words, he didn't really appreciate either the machine-made talus or the Corfu Esrog. However, it is reported that even though the Chassam Sofer was the first challenger of the Corfu Esrog, we have a tshuva, it's printed in Likutei Tshuvas Chassam Sofer from the Ksav Sofer, who testified on Avua de Shmuel, meaning on his father, that the Chassam Sofer himself took the Corfu Esrog and made a bracha on the Corfu Esrog. Now, another interesting question that the Beis Meir brings up is, could you use the Corfu Esrog? There's a psul by Esrogim, and this we mentioned when we were in the fort, of Shem Levai. Shem Levai means, in order for Hadassim to be kosher, it could be called Hadassim, it could be called New Zealand Hadassim, it could be called Flatbush Hadassim. Doesn't matter what it's called. As long as the word Hadas is in there, doesn't matter what name of location is in there. However, a Shem Levai by an Esrog is a psul. So the Beis Meir said that the Corfu Esrog was pasul because it's called a Corfu Esrog, so it has an accompanying name. However, the Chelkas Yoav disagrees with that, and as we mentioned, he writes that the name Corfu is not a descriptive name of the type of esrog that it is, because there's nothing unique about a Corfu esrog. It doesn't look differently, it doesn't smell differently, it doesn't have different belitos. The reason it's called a Corfu esrog is because it comes from Corfu. If the name is there just to indicate what the location is, that would not be a problem with an esrog. Now, I want to share with you, there was a very big movement. By the way, just to share, the Beis Ephraim holds there's no problem with the Corfu esrog in terms of morkav, because any time there's a location that has a major esrog industry, the Beis Meir holds chazaka uman loimariam nosai. You can rely on a chazaka that any location that has an industry of esrogim, that there's a chazaka that it's not morkav. However, there is a major movement only to use esrogim that come from Eretz Yisrael, even though, by the way, the esrogim that came from Eretz Yisrael, I don't even like to say this. I don't even know if you're allowed to say this, but this is what the Gedolim said, so I'm going with it. Even though the esrogim of Eretz Yisrael were not as aesthetically as beautiful as the Corfu esrog, nevertheless, there was a big movement that where the esrogei Eretz Yisrael were available, that should be used primarily. So, for example, Rav Shmuel Heller, the Rav in Tzfas, testified that the esrogim that come from in the vicinity of Tzfas are muchzik b'kashrusan, and therefore you should dafka take esrogim that come from Eretz Yisrael. Reb Chaim Falaji said, even though Reb Chaim Falaji says there's a chazaka that the esrogim in Eretz Yisrael are not morkavim. Avnei Nezer writes, Our Chaim Simentav Pedalid, Yesh lahader likach esrog Eretz Yisrael, af she'enoi na kolkach kishar esrogim kagoin Corfu. So the Avnei Nezer says that esrogim in Corfu are more beautiful than the ones in Eretz Yisrael. But nevertheless, it's still more ideal to take an esrog from Corfu. Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan also says, better to take esrogim from Eretz Yisrael. By the way, the Aruch HaShulchan has a following lashon, a wondrous lashon. Zok the Aruch HaShulchan, better, he says, chas v'shalom, to take pre ben hasnua Al esroige ben ho'ahuva. It's a play on words on the pasuk in Kiseitze. The esrogim of Eretz Yisrael are bnei ahuva. The esrogim in Chutz Haaretz are bnei snua. It doesn't matter where they come from. The bottom line is that most poskim gave preference to esrogim Eretz Yisrael. In fact, Shailus Tshuvas Tirosh v'Yitzhar finds a remez in the pasuk not to take daled minim that come from anywhere other than Eretz Yisrael. The pasuk says, Imlai ala es Yerushalayim al Rosh Simchasi, on the Yom Tov of Sukkot, which is Rosh Simchasi. Imlai ala es Yerushalayim, ala es Rashi Tevos, Esrog, Arava, Lulav, Hadas. So there's no question that even if you're going to say that the Esrog, Corfu are kosher, as we have Eidos, Chasam Sofer himself used it out of necessity, and many poskim say that there's no issue of harkava. Nevertheless, the esroige Eretz Yisrael would be always adif. So that's some background on the esroigim of Corfu. Thank you very much. Okay, good afternoon everyone. We're driving through the streets of Corfu, so I want to give you some background about one of the important halachic topics that is relevant to Corfu, and that is the esroige Corfu. In 1809, the Corfu esrog became one of the most well-used esrogim throughout the Jewish world. It began to be used in Poland, in Ukraine, in Lithuania, even though the one who came out most vehemently against the Corfu esrog was none other than the Chasam Sofer himself. And the reason why the Chasam Sofer came out against the Corfu esrog is primarily because Chasam Sofer felt, and there's a certain degree of uncertainty about this, but the Chasam Sofer felt that just like kosher birds, even if it meets all the requirements of a kosher animal, nevertheless, if there's no positive Mesorah that the bird is kosher, we don't eat it. The same thing with the daled minim. Unless there's a positive Mesorah that the esrog is kosher, even though there's no reason to assume it's pasul. It has a pitum, it has blitos, it has mitz, it has all the qualities of an esrog. But because there was no definitive Mesorah, the Chasam Sofer was roish l'chol hamefakbekim be'esroige Corfu. Even though it began to be used, actually we know that the Corfu esrog was used outside of Poland, even by the Rabbi Yehuda already in 1785. We know that Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev used the Corfu esrog. Harav HaKadosh Mulublin used the Corfu esrog, and that was primarily because there was a war in France, and the avenues of what had been considered until then the premium esrog in the world, which was the Yanava esrog, which came from Calabria, that was no longer available. And now the esrog of choice out of necessity was the Corfu esrog. And as mentioned, the Chasam Sofer came out most vehemently about it for the reason of there was no positive Mesorah. Other Gedolim had different issues with the Corfu esrog. For example, Reb Shlomo Kluger held that there was a shaila, whether about the genealogy, the ancestry of the Corfu esrog, whether there was a shaila of Morkov in the Corfu esrog. Now, in halacha, there's a difference between esrog Morkov and an esrog who has harkava in the ancestry. So while an esrog Morkov may be problematic, if there is some admixture in the ancestry, that may be less of an issue. So now, if you want to be able to use the Corfu esrog, you need to take care of basically 5 issues. Number 1, the poskim that allowed the Corfu esrog, they had to show that there's no chashash of harkava. Or, for example, the Beis Ephraim held that even if there is a chashash harkava, the Corfu esrog was still kosher. You needed to show that a Mesorah is not needed for esrogim. And based on the fact that the Rabbi Yehuda used it, and the Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Ditchev used it, and the Rav of Lublin used it, that was the basis to be able to use the Corfu esrog. Now, as it is well known, in Chabad, they hold the Yanava esrog is like one of the Aseret HaDibros. They hold that when Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Har Sinai, Hashem told Moshe to take a Yanava esrog. That's what they say. So they asked, but wait a second, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Bar Ditchev used the Corfu etrog, and the Rebbe Rashab said, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Bar Ditchev, everybody knows that a seed from Calabria blew in the wind all the way to Corfu and produced one Yanava etrog here in Corfu. So that's how they were melets. That's how they were mamlets on the Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Bar Ditchev using the Corfu etrog. Actually, when the Tzemach Tzedek heard about the Corfu etrog, he said if he would have the capacity, he would take a Corfu etrog, he would wrap it in a talus made by a machine, and he would throw both of them into a fire. In other words, he didn't really appreciate either the machine-made talus or the Corfu etrog. However, it is reported that even though the Chassam Sofer was the first challenger of the Corfu etrog, we have a tshuva, it's printed in Likutei Tshuvas Chassam Sofer from the Ksav Sofer, who testified on Avua de Shmuel, meaning on his father, that the Chassam Sofer himself took the Corfu etrog and made a bracha on the Corfu etrog. Now, another interesting question that the Beis Meir brings up is, could you use the Corfu etrog? There's a psul by etrogim, and this we mentioned when we were in the fort, of Shem Levai. Shem Levai means, in order for Hadassim to be kosher, it could be called Hadassim, it could be called New Zealand Hadassim, it could be called Flatbush Hadassim. Doesn't matter what it's called. As long as the word Hadas is in there, doesn't matter what name of location is in there. However, a Shem Levai by an etrog is a psul. So the Beis Meir said that the Corfu etrog was pasul because it's called a Corfu etrog, so it has an accompanying name. However, the Chelkas Yoav disagrees with that, and as we mentioned, he writes that the name Corfu is not a descriptive name of the type of etrog that it is, because there's nothing unique about a Corfu etrog. It doesn't look differently, it doesn't smell differently, it doesn't have different belitos. The reason it's called a Corfu etrog is because it comes from Corfu. If the name is there just to indicate what the location is, that would not be a problem with an etrog. Now, I want to share with you, there was a very big movement. By the way, just to share, the Beis Ephraim holds there's no problem with the Corfu etrog in terms of morkav, because any time there's a location that has a major etrog industry, the Beis Meir holds chazaka uman loimariam nosai. You can rely on a chazaka that any location that has an industry of etrogim, that there's a chazaka that it's not morkav. However, there is a major movement only to use etrogim that come from Eretz Yisrael, even though, by the way, the etrogim that came from Eretz Yisrael, I don't even like to say this. I don't even know if you're allowed to say this, but this is what the Gedolim said, so I'm going with it. Even though the etrogim of Eretz Yisrael were not as aesthetically as beautiful as the Corfu etrog, nevertheless, there was a big movement that where the etrogei Eretz Yisrael were available, that should be used primarily. So, for example, Rav Shmuel Heller, the Rav in Tzfas, testified that the etrogim that come from in the vicinity of Tzfas are muchzik b'kashrusan, and therefore you should dafka take etrogim that come from Eretz Yisrael. Reb Chaim Falaji said, even though Reb Chaim Falaji says there's a chazaka that the etrogim in Eretz Yisrael are not morkavim. Avnei Nezer writes, Or Chaim Siman Tav Pei Daled, Yesh lahader likach etrog Eretz Yisrael af she'enoi na kolkach kishar etrogim kugoin Corfu. So the Avnei Nezer says that etrogim in Corfu are more beautiful than the ones in Eretz Yisrael, but nevertheless, it's still more ideal to take an etrog from Corfu. Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan also says, better to take etrogim from Eretz Yisrael. By the way, the Aruch HaShulchan has a following lashon, a wondrous lashon. Zakt Aruch HaShulchan, better, he says, chas v'shalom, to take pri ben hasnua al esroige ben ho'ahuva. It's a play on words on the pasuk in Kiseitze. The etrogim of Eretz Yisrael are bnei ahuva. The etrogim in Chutz Haaretz are bnei snua. It doesn't matter where they come from. The bottom line is that most poskim gave preference to Esrog Eretz Yisrael. In fact, Shailus Tshuvas Tirosh v'Yitzhar finds a remez in the pasuk not to take daled minim that come from anywhere other than Eretz Yisrael. The pasuk says, Imlai ala es Yushalayim al Rosh Simchasi, on the Yom Tov of Sukkot, which is Rosh Simchasi. Imlai ala es Yushalayim, ala es Rashi Tevois, Esrog, Arava, Lulav, Hadas. So there's no question that even if you're going to say that the Esrog, Corfu are kosher, as we have Eidos, Chassam Sofer himself used it out of necessity, and many poskim say that there's no issue of Harkava. Nevertheless, the Esroge Eretz Yisrael would be always Adif. So that's some background on the Esrogim of Corfu. Thank you very much. Okay, good afternoon everyone. We're driving through the streets of Corfu, so I want to give you some background about one of the important halachic topics that is relevant to Corfu, and that is the Esroge Corfu. In 1809, the Corfu Esrog became one of the most well-used Esrogim throughout the Jewish world. It began to be used in Poland, in Ukraine, in Lithuania, even though the one who came out most vehemently against the Corfu Esrog was none other than the Chassam Sofer himself. And the reason why the Chassam Sofer came out against the Corfu Esrog is primarily because Chassam Sofer felt, and there's a certain degree of uncertainty about this, but the Chassam Sofer felt that just like kosher birds, even if it meets all the requirements of a kosher animal, nevertheless, if there's no positive Mesorah that the bird is kosher, we don't eat it. The same thing with the daled minim. Unless there's a positive Mesorah that the Esrog is kosher, even though there's no reason to assume it's pasul. It has a pitum, it has blitois, it has mitz, it has all the qualities of an Esrog. But because there was no definitive Mesorah, the Chassam Sofer was roish l'chol hamefakbekim be'esroge Corfu. Even though it began to be used, actually we know that the Corfu Esrog was used outside of Poland, even by the Rabbi Yehuda already in 1785. We know that Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev used the Corfu Esrog. Harav HaKadosh Lublin used the Corfu Esrog, and that was primarily because there was a war in France, and the avenues of what had been considered until then the premium Esrog in the world, which was the Yanava Esrog, which came from Calabria, that was no longer available. And now the Esrog of choice out of necessity was the Corfu Esrog. And as mentioned, the Chassam Sofer came out most vehemently about it for the reason of there was no positive Mesorah. Other Gedolim had different issues with the Corfu Esrog. For example, Reb Shlomo Kluger held that there was a shaila, whether about the genealogy, the ancestry of the Corfu Esrog, whether there was a shaila of Morkov in the Corfu Esrog. Now, in halacha, there's a difference between Esrog Morkov and an Esrog who has Harkava in the ancestry. So while an Esrog Morkov may be problematic, if there is some admixture in the ancestry, that may be less of an issue. So now, if you want to be able to use the Corfu Esrog, you need to take care of basically 5 issues. Number 1, the poskim that allowed the Corfu Esrog, they had to show that there's no chashash of Harkava. Or, for example, the Beis Ephraim held that even if there is a chashash Harkava, the Corfu Esrog was still kosher. You needed to show that a Mesorah is not needed for Esrogim. And based on the fact that the Rabbi Yehuda used it, and the Rabbi Yitzchak Berditchev used it, and the Rav of Lublin used it, that was the basis to be able to use the Corfu Esrog. Now, as it is well known, in Chabad, they hold the Yanava Esrog is like one of the Aseret HaDibros. They hold that when Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Har Sinai, Hashem told Moshe to take a Yanava Esrog. That's what they say. So they asked, but wait a second, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditchev used the Corfu Esrog, and the Rebbe Rashab said, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, everybody knows that a seed from Calabria blew in the wind all the way to Corfu and produced one Yanava Esrog here in Corfu. So that's how they were melitz That's how they were mamlets on the Rabbi Levi Yitzchak about dish of using the Corfu etrog. Actually, when the Tzemach Tzedek heard about the Corfu etrog, he said if he would have the capacity, he would take a Corfu etrog, he would wrap it in a talus made by a machine, and he would throw both of them into a fire. In other words, he didn't really appreciate either the machine-made talus or the Corfu etrog. However, it is reported that even though the Chassam Sofer was the first challenger of the Corfu etrog, we have a tshuva, it's printed in Likutei Tshuvas Chassam Sofer, from the Ksav Sofer, who testified on Avua de Shmuel, meaning on his father, that the Chassam Sofer himself took the Corfu etrog and made a bracha on the Corfu etrog. Now, another interesting question that the Beis Meir brings up is, could you use the Corfu etrog? There's a psul by etrogim, and this we mentioned when we were in the fort, of Shem Levi. Shem Levi means, in order for Hadassim to be kosher, it could be called Hadassim, it could be called New Zealand Hadassim, it could be called Flatbush Hadassim. Doesn't matter what it's called. As long as the word Hadas is in there, doesn't matter what name of location is in there. However, a Shem Levi by an etrog is a psul. So the Beis Meir said that the Corfu etrog was pasul because it's called a Corfu etrog, so it has an accompanying name. However, the Chelkas Yoav disagrees with that, and as we mentioned, he writes that the name Corfu is not a descriptive name of the type of etrog that it is, because there's nothing unique about a Corfu etrog. It doesn't look differently, it doesn't smell differently, it doesn't have different belitos. The reason it's called a Corfu etrog is because it comes from Corfu. If the name is there just to indicate what the location is, that would not be a problem with an etrog. Now, I want to share with you, there was a very big movement. By the way, just to share, the Beis Ephraim holds there's no problem with the Corfu etrog in terms of morkav, because any time there's a location that has a major etrog industry, the Beis Meir holds chazaka uman loimariam nosai. You can rely on a chazaka that any location that has an industry of etrogim, that there's a chazaka that it's not morkav. However, there is a major movement only to use etrogim that come from Eretz Yisrael, even though, by the way, the etrogim that came from Eretz Yisrael, I don't even like to say this. I don't even know if you're allowed to say this, but this is what the Gedolim said, so I'm going with it. Even though the etrogim of Eretz Yisrael were not as aesthetically as beautiful as the Corfu etrog, nevertheless, there was a big movement that where the etrogei Eretz Yisrael were available, that should be used primarily. So, for example, Rav Shmuel Heller, the Rav in Tzfas, testified that the etrogim that come from in the vicinity of Tzfas are muchzik b'kashrusan, and therefore you should dafka take etrogim that come from Eretz Yisrael. Reb Chaim Falaji said, even though Reb Chaim Falaji says there's a chazaka that the etrogim in Eretz Yisrael are not morkavim. Avnei Nezer writes, Reb Chaim Siman Tov Pei Daled, Yesh lahader likach etrog Eretz Yisrael af she'enoi na kolkach kishar etrogim kagoin Corfu. So the Avnei Nezer says that etrogim and Corfu are more beautiful than the ones in Eretz Yisrael, but nevertheless, it's still more ideal to take an etrog from Corfu. Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan also says, better to take etrogim from Eretz Yisrael. By the way, the Aruch HaShulchan has a following lashon, a wondrous lashon. Zakt Aruch HaShulchan, better, he says, chas v'shalom, to take pre-ben hasnua al esroige ben ho'ahuva. It's a play on words on the pasuk in Kiseitze. The esrogim of Eretz Yisrael are bnei ahuva. The esrogim in Chutz Haaretz are bnei snua. It doesn't matter where they come from. The bottom line is that most poskim gave preference to esroige Eretz Yisrael. In fact, Shailus Teshuvas Tirosh v'Yitzhar finds a remez in the pasuk not to take daled minim that come from anywhere other than Eretz Yisrael. The pasuk says, Imlai ala es Yushalayim al roish simchasi. on the Yom Tov of Sukkot, which is Rosh Simchasi, Imlai Ales Yushalayim, Ales Rashi Tevois, Esrog, Arava, Lulav, Hadas. So there's no question that even if you're going to say that the Esrog, Corfu are kosher, as we have Eidos, Chassam Sofer himself used it out of necessity, and many poskim say that there's no issue of Harkava. Nevertheless, the Esroge Eretz Yisrael would be always Adif. So that's some background on the Esrogim of Corfu. Thank you. And this is an idea that every Jew intuitively understands, but even the greatest Gentile philosopher cannot comprehend how our tears will build the Beis HaMikdash. So this should just put into context when these individuals lived. Plato actually was in the time that the Parthenon was built, and this goes back. He's somebody who even met Yirmiyah HaNavi. Rabbi Isai, Shluf Gazant. Okay, there's a question that Aristotle once asked. Why is it that the giver loves the receiver more than the receiver loves the giver? That's just a phenomenon, that's the reality of life. The one who's nice and the one who gives, he usually loves the person who he gives to more than the person who receives loves the one who gave it to him. So Aristotle said like this: the hana of the one giving is greater than the hana of the one receiving. There's a greater joy in giving than a joy in receiving, so therefore the love of the giver is greater than the receiver. So Rabbi Yerucham said it's true, but Rabbi Yerucham said that there's a much deeper nekuda to it. We know that the Rebbeinu Shem created the world because derech hatoiv lahetiv. It's the manner of someone of the essence of goodness to be meitiv. Hashem didn't create the world because we needed something, because we didn't exist. Hashem created the world because He had an innate ratzoin to be able to give. Therefore, since we're created in the image of Hashem, the entire tachlis habriya is to be noisein, because we're supposed to emulate Hashem. So the love of the giver will always be greater than the receiver. The hana of the giver will be greater than the receiver, because that's the entire objective and the purpose of creation, to emulate Hashem who created the world, not to fulfill a need, but rather to be able to give, because derech hatoiv lahetiv. So Rabbi Yerucham said Aristotle, what he said was correct, but still it did not hit the nail on the head. Okay, good morning everyone. I hope everybody had a good sleep and a good breakfast. And here we're in Athens, the seat of Greek ideology. I want to continue to speak about Alexander the Great and his role in history. And yesterday we mentioned Alexander the Great really rose to power 1,000 years after we left Mitzrayim. Again, calculation being, we were in the Midbar for 40 years. We were in Eretz Yisrael 440 years before they built the first Beis HaMikdash. The first Beis HaMikdash was built 480 years after they left Mitzrayim. First Beis HaMikdash stood for 410 years, 70 years in Bavel. The Gemara tells us Alexander rises to power 34 years into Bayis Sheni. And in the 40th year, which is 1,000 years from Yetzias Mitzrayim, is the main ascendancy of Alexander the Great. So I want to read to you what the Rambam writes in Hilchos Kiddush HaChodesh. The Rambam gives us his calculations of how he formulates, it's called, he intercalates the calendar. And the Rambam is, so to speak, excusing himself. He's being misnatzel, because the cheshbonos the Rambam makes are not based on Jewish sources. He says the calculations he makes, Chachmas hatekufos, gematriyos, shechibruba, Chachmei Yavan, Svarim Harbe. The Greeks composed many books. Vehem hanim samachshav biyad hachachamim. These are books that the Jewish sages have in their possession. So the Rambam says, why didn't I come on to Jewish sources? The Jewish sources would have been from the Shevet Yisachar. The pasuk says, Uvnei Yisachar yoidei vino la'itim. We know Shevet Yisachar specialized in intercalation. So the Rambam is bothered. Why is he coming on to Greek sources? Why doesn't he use the sources of the Jewish people? He says the Jewish books, Loi higiu eleinu, we never got them. So says the Rambam, but still, how am I allowed to rely on Greek sources? Maybe they're distorted, maybe they're miscalculated. Says the Rambam, this is mathematics. It's a measured formula. This is not a matter of ideology or philosophy. It's something that could be counted, measured, and we know how they arrived at these calculations. Therefore, it's irrelevant where it comes from. Let's look at the content. Let's not look at who presented it. So the Rambam is, so to speak, bothered. How is he allowed to get this content from the Greeks? And the answer is, it's just a scientific formula. So really, it doesn't matter where the content comes from. Rav Moshe Shapiro asks on this Rambam, what's the Rambam troubled by? If the Rambam was presenting to us, what's 10 times 50? And the Rambam would say, well, 10 times 50 is 500. Then what difference would it make where the Rambam learned that formula from? It's something that we could all figure out on our own. Of course it's irrelevant where it comes from. Why is the Rambam even troubled that he got it from a Greek source? The Rambam's not giving us Hilchos Deos. The Rambam is giving us how to intercalate the calendar. Why is the Rambam in fact bothered where he gets these calculations from? But apparently, Rav Moshe Shapiro says, the Jewish calculations would have been very different than the Greek calculations, and that's because the Jewish calculations, we would have understood how they're derived from the Torah itself. But unfortunately now, all we have is the content, but we don't understand how it stems from the Torah itself. We know all disciplines are rooted in the Torah. So the Rambam is being misnatzel that unfortunately we don't have our own sources for the lunar year. We have to come on to the Greek sources. Now, I want to share with you the comments of Seder Olam. Everybody know what Seder Olam is? Yeah, Seder Olam, for instance, if you look in Rashi will often quote, Rashi, when he tells us what year things happened in, Rashi will quote Seder Olam. Seder Olam are braisos that come from Tanoim about the years of the world history. In Seder Olam it says, on the Pasuk in Daniel, that the he-goat referred to in Daniel is the first king of Yavan, and Alexander Moikdan, who ruled for 12 years. Ready for the round? Listen to Seder Olam. Says Seder Olam. All conversation will continue after the drasha. Thank you very much. But listen to Seder Olam. Seder Olam tells us Alexander ruled for 12 years. Ad kan hoyu hanaviyim isnabeim. Until Alexander, the prophets prophesied. Mikan ve'elach. From Alexander and on, had oznecha ushma divrei chachamim. Prophecy ceased. Tilt your ears and hear the words of the sages. So Seder Olam is saying something oyim v'noira, that until Alexander the Great ruled, there was nevuah in the world. Once Alexander the Great ruled, prophecy ceased, and we now have to come on to chachma, but we no longer have nevuah. Okay, put that in your back pocket for a moment. Comes the Rambam, and the Rambam writes that when we write a get, and you want to date a get, the minhag is we count the years of Gittin, Oili Yitzira, either we count by the creation of the world. This is the Rambam Hilchos Gittin, Perek Av Halachav Zayin. Oy Lamalchus Alexandrus Moikdan. When a Jew writes a get, they no longer would write 57, whatever it is. They write the year from Alexander the Great. In fact, Rav Moshe Shapiro says that he remembers as a kid. This is called Minyan Shtaros. He remembers seeing Shtaros dated from the time of Alexander the Great. This is the minhag in Teiman. I don't think they still do that, but this is called minhag, Minyan Shtaros. Comes the Gra. The Gra is found on Seder Olam Rabbah, and the Gra says, why in the world, when we write a Jewish document, would you date it by Alexander the Great? Why would you date it by Alexander the Great? Why would you not date it from the time of the creation of the world? Says the Gra, Alexander, when he met Shimon HaTzadik, he wanted to put a tselem beheichal. Okay, this is the only makar of this. The Gemara doesn't say Alexander wanted to put an idol in the heichal. Says the Gra, Alexander wanted to put a tselem in the heichal, and they needed to appease him. So, as a token gesture, they said, Alexander, don't put the avodah zarah in the heichal. We're going to throw you a bone. The bone is, from now on, whenever we write a document, we will date it by the year of your ascendancy. Okay, this is the chiddush of the Gra. That the reason why we date Shtaros by Alexander the Great is it was an appeasement to Alexander. He wanted to put a tselem beheichal. Now, again, we know that on Shavas B'Tammuz, Apostamos, put a tzelem behechal. Or according to Rashi, Menashe put a tzelem behechal. The Gemara is being Megala, Alexander wanted to put a tzelem behechal, and as a way out of that, the Gemara says we appeased him by naming after him, right? We call children, even among Klal Yisrael, we don't call them Herod, we don't call them Vespasian, we don't call them Titus, but we'll call them Alexander. That was the appeasement. But the Gemara says that's short. That's short. But the name is, we never told him that. When we told the mailman back to sender. But we told Alexander the Great we would name after him. But the Gra has a little bit of a variance of that. Says the Gra, what we gave Alexander the Great is minyan shtarais. So the question is, what exactly is this concept of minyan shtarais? What's the meaning of it? Why would we continue to practice minyan shtarais? Do we really care about the year that Alexander the Great rose in power? Rabbeinu Nisim Goin, in his Akdama to Shas, tells us that minyan shtarais is a lot deeper than just the year that Alexander rose to power. Because as it says in Seder Olam, the year Alexander rose to power, Nevuah stopped. Says Rabbeinu Nisim Goin, there was a world with Nevuah, and there was a world without Nevuah. It's a different world. It's a different Bria. There was a world that Hashem communicated to man, and then there's a world that we have to figure out what the Rebbeinu Shem wants from us through Chachma. Now, I always say, Chacham Adif Minavi. I like that. Some people, they like to go to Mekubalim because they feel the Mekubal will say, I have the inside scoop. I know what Hashem wants. I think it's better to go to a Chacham. Isn't it better not to know what Hashem wants and to figure it out than for Hashem to, I think the Gemara says, Chacham Adif Minavi. Anyway, we're going to talk more about that later. Rabbeinu Nisim Goin says the inyan of minyan shtarais is that there are two eras in world history. There's the era of Nevuah and there's the era of Chachma. When Alexander the Great came to the world, apparently he created a mechitza. The mechitza is Greek ideology. Greek ideology says we only believe what could be measured, what could be figured out, what could be calculated, but we will not utilize information through divine origin. We no longer come on to Nevuah. We no longer come on to divine communication. We only come on to Chachma. When Alexander came to the world, he created a mechitza of Nevuah. There is no longer Nevuah. Now, as Seder Olam says, Had Oznecha Ushma Divrei Chachamim. Now, it's very interesting because we know the Yevanim nikbitzu alai ufartzu choymois migdalai. They created a pirza. It says in Mishlei, Be'ein chazayin yifra ha'am. Says Rashi, when there's no longer Nevuah, yifra ha'am, yifritzu bam pratzais. The idea that Nevuah protects Klal Yisrael from pratzais. That's why Yevanim nikbitzu alai upartzu choymois migdalai. There's an idea that when we have to rely on Chachma, then we're open to error. We're open to mistake. They're pratzos in the guardianship of the Jewish people. I want to share with you a chiddush. The Gemara tells us that when the Yevanim translated the Torah, the Septuagint, the Targum Shivim, Choshech descended to the world for 3 days. That's one of the reasons we fast on Asar B'Teves, on Ches Teves, on Tes Teves. They translated the Torah. I have a question for you. Did darkness descend on the world when Art Scroll translated Shas? I have a better question. How about when Moshe Rabbeinu translated the Torah into 70 languages before we entered Eretz Yisrael? Moshe Rabbeinu translated the Torah Bayar Hetev. Rashi says Shivim Lashonos. Why, when the Greeks translated the Torah, darkness came down to the world for 3 days, and when Moshe Rabbeinu translated the Torah, that's okay? What's wrong with translation? What's wrong with translation? Moshe translated it. Yeah, we translated it. The Chachamim translated it. We were the ones, and by the way, the Gemara says the Chacham translated Baruch HaKodesh. So what was wrong? I think the answer is like this. Why did the Greeks want the Torah translated? The Greeks said, the Ramban writes, the Greeks believed in anything they could calculate, measure, and understand with human reasoning. The Greeks were trying to translate the Torah to be able to glean whatever wisdom was something that resonated with them on an intellectual level, something that they could understand on a level of seichel. But anything that was of divine origin, anything of the supernatural, they would discard. Their purpose in translating the Torah was to make the Torah something that was seichel ha'anushi. So that brought darkness to the world. That stopped prophecy. That's when Alexander the Great came to power. Prophecy ceased and Chachma began. But if the purpose of translating the Torah is to be able to understand the entire Torah, not just what resonates to human seichel, but even the supernatural, then that's perfectly okay. Moshe Rabbeinu himself was the one who translated the Torah for Klal Yisrael. One more thing I want to share with you. You know, the Gemara tells us that when Alexander came to the Heichal, he wanted to put a tselem in the Heichal, and what did we do? We started counting shtaros from the years of Alexander. So listen to this cheshbon. Somehow, by counting shtaros from the year of Alexander, it was mevatel him making a tselem in the Heichal. Listen carefully. Everybody knows that when Nevuah stopped, what else stopped? Avodah Zarah. So listen to what the wisdom of the Chachamim was. They saw that Alexander wanted to put Avodah Zarah in the Heichal, and they had to make an executive decision. If we're going to give Alexander minyan shtaros, what will that be saying? That there's a new era in world history. Before now there was prophecy, there will no longer be prophecy. Said the Chachamim, that's our only way to ensure that he won't put itself in the Heichal. Because by stopping prophecy, you know what else would stop? Avodah Zarah would stop. Meaning this was not just a practical move to say, well, we'll throw you a bone, we'll give you minyan shtaros, and now you won't put itself in the Heichal. It's by counting minyan shtaros, they were saying, we're going to usher in the era of a world without prophecy. A world without prophecy is a world without Avodah Zarah. Mamela, Alexander no longer had the desire. That taiva was abolished of the Hamidu Tselem Behechal. So this is a little bit of a background of what Alexander the Great stood for. And Marv Rabbi Sai, I just want to end off with what the Malbim says on the closing words of the Navi. We know the Navi Malachi, the last Navi, by the way, in the year 1000, when Alexander the Great rose to power, 1,000 years from Yetzias Mitzrayim, 34 or so years into the second Beis HaMikdash. That's when Nevuah stopped. So who passed away then? Malachi passed away. According to many, he was Ezra passed away. Chagai and Zechariah passed away. What are the closing words of Malachi? Zichru Toras Moshe Avdi. Says the Malbim. Why now Zichru Toras Moshe Avdi? Because Nevuah was about to stop. If we had Nevuah, it wasn't as critical, Zichru Toras Moshe. We would still have Nevi'im to remind us. We would have Nevi'im ve'elav tishma'un. But now that Nevuah was stopping, so now the Navi Malachi tells us, Zichru Toras Moshe Avdi. This is a little bit of the background of Alexander the Great and the era that he ushered in. Thank you very much. Okay, good morning. With your permission, could I share with you one more thing? Okay, we're in Athens. I want to share with you something that I heard in the name of Rav Soloveitchik. I want to present it to you. I want you to think about it. I heard this from Rav Hershel Schachter personally, and it's also in the biography of Rav Soloveitchik, and it's based on the Gemara and Brachos. I want you to think about it. There's a famous Gemara in Brachos. David HaMelech would compare himself to the kings of the nations of the world. David HaMelech would say the kings of the nations of the world, they sit in royalty, they sit in pomp and ceremony, but they're not willing to get their hands dirty. But David HaMelech says, Va'ani yadai melachlachos, my hands are soiled, my hands are dirty, bedam, with blood, shapir v'shilya, a placenta and a uterus, kedei latar isha labala. In other words, like many rabbanim, sometimes they have to look at maros. So it's not, it's not the cleanest job, but somebody's got to do it. So literally, David HaMelech is saying, the nations of the world, they sit in pomp and ceremony, but I get down and dirty. What exactly is David HaMelech saying? So Rav Soloveitchik would say, what is the nekuda and the difference between Chachmas Yavan and Chachmas Yisrael? The Yavanim believed that the greatness of man was only in his mind, thought, philosophy, probing the mysteries of the universe. For them, menial labor was considered demeaning. Working the land was considered demeaning. Therefore, when the Greeks were trying to discover the mysteries of the universe, they wanted to know about gravity, they thought about it. They wanted to know about the water system, they thought about it. They wanted to know about biology, they extrapolated, they thought about it. But Chachmei Yisrael, we don't philosophize. Chachmei Yisrael, they do experimentation. Chachmei Yisrael follow halachically science. They experiment. When David HaMelech says, my hands are dirty with shapir v'shilya, because we don't believe in philosophy. We believe in experimentation. So what does that mean? It sounds almost the opposite. It sounds like we believe in science, we believe in experimentation. I want to share with you Ramban. The Ramban, in the beginning of Elo Treifos, asks, there's a shaila in the Gemara, could a treifa live or not? Could a treifa survive or not? You know what a treifa is? Treifa is an animal that has a mortal wound. And the question is, could an animal survive 12 months or not? And the Ramban asks the question, you can't have a machloikus about that. Get 1,000 animals and do an experiment. Says Ramban Yisoid, the Chachmei Yisrael will never argue in Metzius. You know why? How do you argue in reality? Just experiment. The Gemara is full of experiments that the Chachamim conducted. But the Greeks would never experiment. They would philosophize, they would think, they would probe. And whether their conclusions actually coincided with science or not was not relevant to them. To them, the reality of what they saw before their eyes did not have bearing on what their minds told them. But in halacha, there's a famous rule in Lamdas. Anybody who learned in yeshiva knows you can't have a machlokes and metzius. Why? So one of the reasons is because just experiment. The Ramban is writing. The Ramban is saying the Chachamim would never argue what a treifa is, because they could easily take 1,000 animals, put them in a pen, and see whether the treifas live or they don't live. Now, by the way, a support to this idea is from the Gemara in Bechoros that we learned yesterday. The Gemara in Bechoros says the Chachmei Atuna asked Rabbi Yehuda ben Hananya, and they were discussing how long it takes for a snake to give birth. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Hananya said 7 years. So the Greeks said 3 years. The Greeks said, we saw. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Hananya says, your experiment was faulty. Because everybody knows whenever you experiment, it has to be an authentic experiment. But those snakes were already 4 years pregnant. So again, that shows that the Greeks were not transparent in their process of experimentation. So this is another idea of the difference between Chachmei Yisrael and Chachmei Umas Ha'olam. In other words, we will not rely in halacha just based on philosophy alone. It has to be something. In other words, this is, in a certain sense, the opposite of what many think intuitively. But when it comes to halacha, the halacha will integrate the reality of experimentation even more than any other nations of the world. Okay, good. Friends, finishing up the Chachmei Atuna, you know, Rav Shlomo Kluger says everybody knows that Rabba would begin his drasha with a joke, right? Rabba would always begin b'milsav d'vdichusa. But what many don't know is how would Rabba end off his shiur? Would Rabba say a joke at the end of the shiur? Says Rav Shlomo Kluger, the same way you have to start off with a joke, you always have to end with a joke. How do we know? Smeichem b'tzeisam v'sasim b'vayam. It's not only sasim b'vayam, it's also smeichem b'tzeisam. So I want to share with you a joke, an Athens joke from none other than Reb Chaim Kanievsky. So what? Reb Chaim Kanievsky? Well, we already know the lesson he learned from Alexander the Great. Now I'm going to give you some classic Reb Chaim humor from Athens. The Gemara in Tamid on Daf Lamed Aleph Amud Beis brings that Alexander the Great asked the Ziknei Negev 10 questions. One of the questions was, what's further? Is Shamayim further than Aretz, or is Mizrach further than Marav? In other words, what's further, from east to west, or from top to bottom? So the Chachamim said from east to west. Why? Because when the sun is in the east, you can look at it. When the sun is in the west, you can look at it. When the sun is directly overhead, it's too bright. That shows top to bottom is less than east to west. The sages, that's what other Chachamim said they're the same, because the pasuk says, "Ki gavaya shmayim al aretz kirchoik mizrach mimarav." Okay. Then Alexander asked the Chachamim, "Eizehu Chacham?" Who is a wise man? Who remembers what the Chachamim said? Haroyes hanoilad. Someone who could see the future. Right? Remember that Gemara? Eizehu Chacham, Haroyes hanoilad. Right? Every time your kid makes a mistake, and instead of saying "I told you so," you say "Eizehu Chacham, Haroyes hanoilad." So they asked Reb Chaim Kanievsky, what do we call a midwife in the Torah? Right? Chachamois. Why? He said, because Eizehu Chacham, Haroyes hanoilad. Okay, everyone, I get them. It was a good one. Come on, that's a good one. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Shalom Aleichem. We're here, headed to Salonica. And Salonica, in the history of the Jewish people, was a key cog in the Messiah of Klal Yisrael. From 1492 until 1590, Salonica was the epicenter of Judaism and Torah for Klal Yisrael. Many Gedolei Yisrael lived in Salonica. Some of their names you may be familiar with, others less so. You had Rabbi Yosef Taitachik. Is that name familiar to you? Rabbi Yosef Taitachik. Just to give you an example, Rabbi Yosef Taitachik was one of the 3 candidates, Min HaShamayim, who was nominated to write the Shulchan Aruch, along with Rabbi Yosef Karoi and a third. You have the Marashtam, Rabbi Shmuel di Modina. You have the Lechem Mishnah, Rabbi Avram di Beton. Rabbi Shlomo Al-Kabitz was here. Rabbi Moshe Mitrani was here. Rabbi Yosef Karoi was here. This was the number one destination when Jews were exiled from Spain, 1492. Years later from Portugal, they came to Salonica. I want to read to you a little bit of some of the descriptions that the Gedolim write about Salonica in those years. So Rabbi Shmuel di Modina, the Maharashtam. The Maharashtam writes in Chashemishah Simon Taf Memhei. He says, through the traversing of the generations, Havcha Shalanuki, Salonica has been transformed Liois Ir Ve'eim B'Yisrael. Now, not every city in Klal Yisrael was called Ir Ve'eim B'Yisrael. Many of you may come from communities in New York that have not yet been called Ir Ve'eim B'Yisrael, present company included. You may come from communities with many yeshivas, many Batei Midrashim, many pizza stores. Not yet have they warranted the title Ir Ve'eim B'Yisrael. There are a few cities that in the history of the Jewish people, Izmir was called Ir Ve'eim B'Yisrael. Salonica, the Marashtam says, was upgraded to the title of Ir Ve'eim B'Yisrael. Kehilois Gedolos, big communities, Morganos Hayabay Lahafli. The number of institutions was wondrous. Gedolei Torah, Marbitzei Torah, Hayuba Lameos. There were literally hundreds of Rabbanim here. I have a sefer, take a look at this, Rabbanon Takifei Ara, a list of literally hundreds of Achronim that lived in Salonica. I venture to say, maybe you've heard of one out of every 100 of them. Marashtam says, Kefi ma shenoidel lanu begalos, ein b'shum makoim kamois gedola miloim dei Torah kazeh. There is no city in the world that had more loim dei Torah than Salonica. Nimtza shagadla malas kedushas chevras talmud Torah zu asher b'Salonica mikad sad mekamas eichos. Therefore, the eminence of the various institutions in Salonica transcended institutions anywhere else. Salonica hi'ir gedola le'lokim ruba Yisrael. The majority of the residents of Salonica were Jewish, to the point where even into the 20th century we'll see the ports were still closed on Shabbos. Uba yeshivos v'chevras talmud Torah she'ein kamoiha b'chal ha'olam. There were Torah academies, there were shuls, there were batei knesios, of which there was nothing like that throughout the world. By the way, Reb Chaim Falaji writes about Salonica, Ir gedola shel chachamim v'shel soifrim ir ve'ein b'Yisrael. We were in Turkey a few years ago, and Shlomi Kol said it was a good trip. So we went to the kever of Reb Chaim Falaji. Reb Chaim Falaji says Salonica also Ir ve'ein b'Yisrael giboyrem asra dezakike denura. The sages were of such eminence, they protruded, they spit out fire. They were so great in Torah, they were exuding fire, shemehem teitzei Torah. So you may have thought you're coming to Salonica, it's a nice destination, we have good tour guides, it's a beautiful community. This was a city that played a major role in the transmission of Torah to Klal Yisrael. I want to begin in segment number 1 by sharing with you about Rav Yosef Taitachak. We're still going, yeah? Rav Yosef Taitachak. Rav Yosef Taitachak was born in 1465. He passed away in 1546. He was born in Constantinople, Istanbul now, in Turkey. By the way, Salonica at the time was part of Turkey. And he was born in Spain. He passed away in Istanbul. And he was already an adult when he was forced to leave Spain with his father in 1492. They settle in Salonica, and Rev Yosef Taitachak's father, Reb Shlomo Taitachak, is one of the leaders of the Sephardic community. Reb Yosef Taitachak then started one of the most important yeshivos in the history of the Jewish people. Now this is very important to know. Reb Yosef Taitachak wrote in a letter that for 30 years his yeshiva here in Salonica was one of the most important yeshivas in the world. For 15 years, he says, there was no yeshiva like his yeshiva, the Kamos Uve'echas. He writes that he had more than 20 Talmidim who were worthy to be Rosh Yeshiva in their own right. By the way, Rav Yosef Taitachak, for 40 years, he did not sleep in a bed. Rav Yosef Taitachak slept on a board. Only Friday night, only on Shabbos, he would sleep in a bed. Moreover, the Chida writes in the Shem Hagadolim that we have a tradition about Rav Yosef Taitachak that in a 24-hour period, he was involved in teaching the yeshiva for 18 hours, and he only took care of his needs in 6 of those hours. So in 6 of those hours, he had to eat, sleep, take care of everything else he needed to take care of. But 18 hours a day he's involved in teaching in the yeshiva. For 40 years he leads the leading yeshiva in Turkey. And from his Talmidim are Rav Shmuel Di Modina, also Rav Yitzchak Ajribi. These are names that should be familiar to you. Rav Yosef Taitachak was adept in astronomy and astrology. And actually there's a historian named Meir Benayahu. Meir Benayahu writes that there's a manuscript that contains Rabbi Yosef Taitachak's comments on astrology, and Rabbi Yosef Taitachak was also in close communication with Shlomo Molcho. I think Shabbos afternoon we're going to have a shiur on Shlomo Molcho. Later on, when Shlomo Molcho became great in Kabbalah, Shlomo Molcho legend has it, taught Rabbi Yosef Taitichak himself. He also had a long line of Talmidei Chacham that came from him. For example, his father, Reb Shlomo, was a great scholar. He had a brother, Reb Shmuel, who was a great Talmid Chacham. And Reb Shmuel's son, Reb Yaakov, was a Rosh Hashiva in Salonica. His grandson, Reb Shmuel II, was a Rav also in Turkey. And Reb Shmuel's brother, Rabbi Yehuda Taitichak, was also a great Talmid Chacham. So Rabbi Yosef Taitichak had a leading yeshiva here in Salonica, and we're going to speak about some of the other Chachamim that lived here in Salonica shortly. Okay, it's a great honor to be here in the Monasterioton Shul, one of the shuls that survived the Holocaust. As we heard, a very high percentage of the community, unfortunately, was killed in the Holocaust. I want to just take a few moments to speak about one of the luminaries that lived here in Salonica. This is a Torah sage that we're all familiar with his works. Anyone who learned in yeshiva heard of the Lechem Mishnah. Lechem Mishnah is one of the classic commentaries on the Rambam. Rabbi Avram di Baton. Now, most people cannot distinguish between the Kesef Mishnah, the Maggid Mishnah, and the Lechem Mishnah. I mean, if you ask somebody who learned yeshiva, which one is more authoritative? Which one do we follow? Who wrote what? Well, the Kesef Mishnah was written by the Beis Yosef. That we know. That's the Beis Yosef's commentary on the Rambam. The Lechem Mishnah is Rabbi Avram di Baton. He's a student of the Marashtam, Rabbi Shmuel di Modina, who is a student of Rabbi Yosef Taitichak. Okay. Now, Rabbi Avram di Baton, he's a student of Marashtam. He's also a Chavrusa of Maharam Kali. We're going to talk about Maharam Kali in a moment. Now, Rabbi Avram di Baton, if you look in the Chida and the Shem HaGedolim, many people have misread this line in the Shem HaGedolim. Shem HaGedolim writes that Rabbi Avram di Baton chiber shtei halechem avad lechem rav mitshuvos v'lechem mishnah chibur nichbar al Rambam. So many people mistakenly understand it to mean that Rabbi Avram di Baton wrote 3 books. Book number 1, you should have the sheet. I want to show you inside. Many people read it. He wrote the book Shtei Halechem. He wrote the book Avad Lechem Rav, which is his Tshuvos, and he wrote the Sefer Lechem Mishnah. The only thing is, you could look far and wide. There is no Sefer Shtei Halechem. But people say Rabbi Avram di Baton wrote the famous Sefer Shtei Halechem. There is no Sefer Shtei Halechem. You will never find a Sefer Shtei Halechem. It's the Chida's poetic license. The Chida is saying he wrote Shtei Halechem, 2 works with the word Lechem in it. Number 1, Avad Lechem Rav, and number 2, Lechem Mishnah. Now, if you look in the Lechem Mishnah, Soif Perek Yud Aleph of Hilchos Tefillah, the Lechem Mishnah says that in the year 1575, he got a hold of the Kesef Mishnah. Now, when he started writing Lechem Mishnah, why was he writing Lechem Mishnah on the Rambam? Because the Rambam never wrote sources. The Rambam writes halachas, and we never know where did the Rambam get this from. So the Lechem Mishnah was giving us the Makairis of the Rambam, but then he got a hold of the Kesef Mishnah, and the Kesef Mishnah already did that. So in 1575, when he got up to Perek Yud Aleph Hilchos Tefillah, he stopped writing Makairis for the Rambam, and from there on, he writes Toros on the Rambam. The Lechem Mishnah is not used so much. It's not used so much. When I say that, I mean, we don't always or usually follow what he says, like we do the Kesef Mishnah and the Maggid Mishnah. There are a few reasons for that. One reason is, there are certain rules that we know the Rambam followed that we're not sure why the Lechem Mishnah wasn't using. I'll just give you 2 quick examples. There's a famous theory in the Rambam. The Rambam's most noted rule is that when it comes to midos, you shouldn't be extreme. You should go b'derech hamamutza, right? The middle path. Everybody knows, the golden path. But the Rambam famously applies this to all midos, including anger, and including arrogance. And that's what the Rambam writes in Perek Aleph. And in Perek Beis, the Rambam says there are 2 midos that you do need to go to the extreme. What are they? Kas and anivos. So it's a famous theory in the Rambam. In other words, when it comes to humility and anger, should you take a moderate approach, or should you go to the extreme, be very humble, should go to extreme and be very calm. So the Halachic Mishnah tries to answer the stira in the Rambam. But if you look in the Ar Sameach says, stira in the Rambam? Look in the Parsha Mishnayos. In the Parsha Mishnayos, the Rambam says, basically, Mid'oraisa, you should always go to extreme, even by kas, even by gaiva. It's a gezerah d'Rabbanan that we have to go to. You should always take the middle path. But it's a gezerah d'Rabbanan not to go to, not to take the moderate path for gaiva, and we have to go ma'oid havish ruach. So in other words, for some reason, the Halachic Mishnah did not follow what the Rambam said in the Parsha Mishnayos, even though we know, now that we have the Parsha Mishnayos, that the Rambam will often be following what he said in the Parsha Mishnayos. Here's another rule. What's the halacha if you have machlekes Bavli Yushalmi? What's the halacha? What do you follow? Bavli or Yushalmi? The Rif writes, you always follow the Bavli. Many times the Halachic Mishnah will ask a stira between the Rambam and the Bavli. But the Gra teaches us that the Rambam will sometimes follow the Yushalmi over the Bavli. But for some reason, the Halachic Mishnah doesn't work with that idea of the Gra. I want to end with two interesting points. Rabbi Avram Di Baton was a student of the Marashdam. He was a chavrusa of Maram Kali that we mentioned before. Maram Kali had a student. Did you ever hear this name? Rav David Conforto. Rav David Conforto was the author of Koirei Hadoros. The Koirei Hadoros says that he's not happy with the Halachic Mishnah. He says that his Rebbe, Maram Kali, told him that almost everything in the Halachic Mishnah, the Halachic Mishnah took from the Chidushim of Maram Kali when Maram Kali learned the Rambam with the Halachic Mishnah, and whatever came out in that Seder from Maram Kali, the Halachic Mishnah recorded it. But it's really from Maram Kali. That's what the Koirei Hadoros writes. So that's one interesting point. But another interesting point is Esther mentioned that in 1917 there was a big fire here in Salonica. This I was unaware of. In the year Shemama is 1625. The entire city burnt down. Right? Is that the correct date?
Yes, it is the circle of the story of the Salonica.
But what's most notable is the day of the year the city burnt down. Salonica burnt down in 1625 on Tisha B'Av. And I was shocked by that because we always say all the tragedies that happened on Tisha B'Av. World War I broke out on Tisha B'Av. The Jews were expelled from England on Tisha B'Av. The Jews were expelled from France on Tisha B'Av in hundreds of years ago. And for some reason, we never list the conflagration of Salonica on Tisha B'Av. So I think that's something we have to think about. In fact, the Koirei Hadoros writes, you have it on your sheet at number 9, that his Rebbe Maram Kali wrote many, many Svarim and many, many Chidushim. And in 1625, when almost all the shuls and all the Bati Midrashim and all the Svarim burnt down, all the writings of his Rebbe Maram Kali burnt down on Tisha B'Av. Okay, one last thing. It's Erev Shabbos. The Halachic Mishnah of Ram Di Baton passed away on Erev Shabbos. It was getting very close to Shabbos. They didn't have the timing down like Avir tours where, we're able to be like nichnas into kemat. We have it down to a science. But back then, they came back from the Levaya of Rav Ram Di Baton and they were choishesh that maybe they were Mechala Shabbos in the Hespedim and the Klura. So it seems like a miracle happened. That on their way home from the burial of Rav Ram Di Baton, the sun came out and it shone to be menachem them that in fact it was not the Shabbat yet, and then they were able to makabel Shabbos with a clear conscience that they didn't desecrate the Shabbos in the final honor of Rabbi Avram Di Baton. So this is one of the great Gedolim that lived here in Salonica, and he was nifter on Erev Shabbos. Zechusa Yagin Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael. Thank you very much. Okay, friends, we're here in Salonica at one of the largest Jewish cemeteries in all of Europe, if not the entire world. There are between 350,000 to 500,000 kvarim here on the land that you're stepping on. If you read the inscription, It says, by the way, the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki and the Jewish community of Thessaloniki erected this monument. Well, thank you to the Aristotle University, because part of the Aristotle University is built with the monuments and the matzevos that used to be in this cemetery. Till today, some of the building comes from the matzevos that were here. You know, it's just impossible to know. Never was I in an ancient and historic Jewish community that there's no relic of the past. We mentioned how many thousands of Gedolim lived here. There is no question, there's not a doubt in anyone's mind that they were not originally buried right over here on this land that we're stepping on. It's Mamish Admas Kodesh. Here it says, you're stepping on sacred ground. You're stepping on what is left of the largest necropolis of the East. You're stepping on the place where the Jews of Thessaloniki were buried for centuries. Strong spirits, kind souls of the most vibrant community of the Mediterranean have found their final rest. Their graves spread out high on the hills, all the way up, until 1943, when the forces of evil crushed human substance. But people were not enough. They wanted to kill the memory too. And as they were sending the living to their death, they were shattering the tombs of the dead and scattering their bones. Now, just a little bit of the history of this area. What's interesting is this cemetery was actually pretty much destroyed even before the Nazis got here. Because in 1917, when we spoke about the fire that burnt down a lot of the city, which, by the way, was caused by a refugee eating eggplant. He was roasting an eggplant, and his fire spread, left 2/3 of the city in ashes, 70,000 residents homeless. Of the 70,000, 52,000 of them were Jews. It burnt down 32 Batei Midrashim. And then again in 1942, by the way, this community began 140 BCE. They used the material, they used the monuments in the Greek Orthodox churches. The university, Aristotle University, was built from the matzevos of this cemetery. The Jewish community was still never compensated even 1 penny for the destruction that took place over here. And as of 2017, the university, the roads, the churches, the playgrounds, the bars, and the restaurants of Salonica are still built from the matzevos of this cemetery. They reach so far that even in Chalkidiki, they have matzevos in the walls and on the pavements. You know, when I was in the shul, I saw in the walls matzevos. I figured it came from the cemetery in Chalkidiki. It may have even come from the cemetery over here. So it's really unfortunate we don't have the opportunity to daven at the kvarim of all these great tzaddikim. We'll say Tehillim over here. And Chazal tell us that tzaddikim don't need a tzion. Divreihem hein tziyunam. Their Torah, their words, their teachings are their tzion. And Bez Hashem, by learning about these tzaddikim, and all of our tefillah should be niskabel barachim v'ratzayin. So Rabbi Yaakov Barav instituted a very novel practice. Rabbi Yaakov Barav, based on the comments of the Rambam, innovated a practice that had not been seen in Klal Yisrael for many hundreds of years. There's something called smicha. Now, the smicha that Rabbanim have today has no halachic significance. All smicha means, the Ramah discusses it in Yeridea, smicha just means that if somebody is practicing psak, the Ramah writes in Yeridea Siman Reish Mem Beis, that it's just a sign that if this individual is paskening, he's doing so with the permission of his Rebbe. But it doesn't give any significant status to the one who receives the smicha. Real smicha had ceased in the times of the Amoraim. Now, what could you do with smicha? With smicha, you could do something very important. You could judge dinei knasais. Dinei knasais means there's monetary law. Monetary law is if somebody owes money or somebody damages, that's regular monetary law. You don't need smicha to judge monetary law. Knasais means there's certain penalties that the Torah or the Chachamim impose, that if you don't have smicha, you cannot impose these penalties. What was the big motivation of Rabbi Yaakov Barav to institute smicha? This is very important. This is in the aftermath of 1492. Many Jews in 1492 masqueraded as Christians. Many Jews who had the opportunity to give up their life al Kiddush Hashem did not do so. They said their name isn't Abraham, their name isn't Yitzchak, their name isn't Yaakov. They declared their belief in another religion. That is a capital offense. Even if your life is on the line, that is something which is a capital offense. A Jew cannot masquerade as a member of another religion. It's considered a violation of Avodah Zarah. A Jew who did that has riding on their shoulders a penalty of kares. Many of the Moranos felt very guilty. They felt that by not giving up their life al Kiddush Hashem, they felt riding on their shoulders was a kares. How does one get off a chiyuv kares? Now, whether or not they were chiyuv kares is a separate discussion. But they felt they could have run away, meaning, in other words, you might say, well, they're an oines, so they're not chiyuv kares. After all, even though a Jew is obligated to give up their life al Kiddush Hashem, if they don't, it's not violating Avodah Zarah. But their life wasn't on the line. They could have left. And if they would have left, they could have continued to observe Judaism. They felt very guilty. They couldn't fall asleep at night. Their conscience hounded them. Does anybody know? Is there any way for a person to get off a chiyuv kares? There's only one way. If you get malchus, if you get lashed, kol hanilkin peturin midei krisasan. So the Moranos felt that if somehow they could get malchus, that would excuse them of their chiyuv kares, and then they could continue to live with a clear conscience and not have to be plagued with guilt that they're chiyuv kares. The only thing is, the Beis Din does not have the ability to give malchus. Only chachamim who have smicha could give malchus. So Rabbi Yaakov Barav was banging his head. He was trying to come up with a way to reinstate the process of smicha. Smicha began with Moshe Rabbeinu. He gave smicha to Yehoshua. He gave smicha to the Shivim Zakenim. They continued the smicha to the Nevi'im. They continued the smicha to the Tanaim. They continued the smicha to the Amoraim. And in the years of Abaye and Rava until Hillel HaNasi HaAchroin, smicha ceased in Klal Yisrael until the year 4,298. And then smicha ended. And Chachamim can no longer give dinei knasais. They can no longer give malchus. They can no longer stop Yom Tov Sheni Shal Galias. Comes Rabbi Yaakov Barav, and he finds a Rambam in Hilchos Sanhedrin Perek Daled. And the Rambam says a chidush nifla shelo yomar davar me'olam. Says the Rambam, it seems to me that if all the Chachamim in Eretz Yisrael appoint dayanim, they could give a dayan smicha. Says the Rambam, if unanimously all the Chachamim gather together in Eretz Yisrael, they could reinstate the smicha process. So Rabbi Yaakov Barav gathered together something like 25 Chachamim, including the Beis Yosef, including the Mabit, including the Alshich, and by all accounts, they gathered together and they gave smicha to Rabbi Yaakov Barav. Whereupon Rabbi Yaakov Barav gave smicha to 4 individuals. 2 of them we know about, 2 of them we're not sure about. Who did he give smicha to? Maran Bet Yosef, the Beis Yosef, the Mabit, Rav Moshe Mitrani. The other 2 we're not sure. But if you look in Sefer Seder Olam, he lists 10 Chachamim who smicha was given to. Residing in Yerushalayim was Rab Levi ibn Chaviv. Rab Levi ibn Chaviv was from Salonica, originally from Spain. He's the son of Rabbi Yaakov ibn Chaviv. Rabbi Yaakov was the author of the Ein Yaakov, the collection of the Agadato. When Rabbi Yaakov passed away, Rab Levi completed the Ein Yaakov. And he said, Rabbi Yaakov Beirav, really? If all the Chachamim in Eretz Yisrael gathered together, they could reinstate smicha? Nobody ever invited me. I was never invited to the party. I was never invited to the presiding. That's number 1. Number 2, the Rambam concludes his words. The Rambam starts off nirinli, meaning there's no raya and shas to this. The Rambam ends off his words, v'hadavar tzarech hechra. Hadavar tzarech hechra means we still need to decide whether this process is legitimate or not. We don't have any definitive source that this is a legitimate process. By the way, I want to share with you that the Rambam writes on the pasuk, V'ashiva shayftayich kivari shayna v'yayatzayich kivatrila achrechein yikra lach ir hatzedek kirya nemana. The Rambam says like this. It says V'ashiva shayftayich kivari shayna v'yayatzayich kivatrila, that Mashiach, before Mashiach comes, the judges will be restored. That implies before the coming of Mashiach, smicha will be returned, and then Mashiach will come. So that was used as a raya that the smicha process could be reinstated. But the Marbach had many tainas against Mari Beirav. Number one, nobody invited me. Number two, the Rambam says v'hadavar tzarech hechra. And even if you're going to say rubai kekulai, that you don't need all the Chachmei Yisrael, all you need is a majority of the Chachmei Yisrael, the din of rubai kekulai is only if everyone is present, then you could follow the majority. But if only the majority is present, you can't follow the majority, because maybe if the minority was there, the majority would have agreed to the minority. The din of rubai kekulai is only rubai mitoich kulai, but there's no din of rubai if the miyot is not present. And for these tainas, the Mahalbach wrote a sefer called Kuntris Hasmicha. He wrote a first edition and a second edition. And he writes, he thanks the Rebbeinu Shalom that in his lifetime he was able to accomplish two great feats. Feat number one, he vehemently opposed Shlomo Mocha. We're going to learn about him on Shabbos. And feat number two is he did not let smicha get off the ground. He vehemently opposed smicha. The Mari Beirav defended his position. He said, when we talk about the sages, rubai kekula is good enough. Especially if Roiv Minyan or Binyan Shal Klal Yisrael were residing in Tzfas. And by the way, this gets involved in another very interesting and controversial issue, and that is, friends, what is the holiest city in the world? Okay, I'm giving you a few choices. Lakewood, Monsey, Williamsburg. Okay, those are all out. Yerushalayim, Tzfas. Can Tzfas have any superiority at all to Yerushalayim? Is that possible? Can we say that there's another city in the world that has even a dimension of Kedusha or greatness greater than Yerushalayim? You know, the Chida's great-great-grandfather, the Chesed Avram, writes, the ear of Tzfas is more pure than anywhere else in the world. There is no city more conducive to the learning of Kabbalah than in the city of Tzfas. And the Chassam Sofer wrote a tshuva vehemently dismissing the claim of the Chesed Avram. Heaven forbid that any city in the world has a superiority to Yerushalayim in any dimension at all. Says the Chassam Sofer, do you know why the city of Tzfas was destroyed in 1837 because of earthquakes? It's because everyone was going to Tzfas and everyone was going to Meron, and Yerushalayim was jealous, and like a jealous co-wife, Yerushalayim caused the destruction of the city of Tzfas. Says the Chassam Sofer, the earthquakes that rattled and destroyed Tzfas in 1837 was because everyone's running everywhere but Yerushalayim, and Yerushalayim was jealous, and therefore the lashon of the Chassam Sofer is Kinas Yerushalayim Asas Azos. Chassam Sofer writes this in the Tshuva. He writes this in Torah's Moshe. Therefore, says the Chassam Sofer, many Jews may go to Meron on Lag BaOmer. Don't count me among them, says the Chassam Sofer. I wouldn't go. Kinas Yerushalayim Asus Azos. Anyway, back to the ranch. This was a great machlokes, and the question is, why did smicha never really get off the ground? By the way, The Beis Yosef continued smicha. Who did he give smicha to? Remember, the Rabbi Yaakov Rav gave smicha to the Beis Yosef and Rabbi Moshe Mitrani. The Beis Yosef gave smicha to the Alshich. The Alshich gave smicha to Reb Chaim Vital. And that was the end of the smicha forever and ever. Says Malbach, that which the Rambam says that before Mashiach comes, smicha will be reinstated, I too agree that smicha will be reinstated before Mashiach comes. Because even Mashiach, when he reveals himself, we have a tradition, will then disappear again and then reveal himself again. Who is to say that when Mashiach reveals himself the first time, he will not reinstate the smicha, disappear, and smicha will be reinstated before Mashiach reveals himself? And who is to say, says Malbach, that we know Eliyahu Hanavi will reveal himself before Mashiach comes? Eliyahu has original smicha, either from Moshe Rabbeinu, if he's Pinchas or Eliyahu, or if he's Eliyahu Hanavi, a smicha from Achia HaShiloini. And therefore, says Malbach, just because smicha will be reinstated before Mashiach comes, that does not necessarily mean that we, human beings, regular chachamim, could reinstate the smicha. The bottom line is, it never really took off. There is a sefer by Rabbi Chil Michal Tikachinsky called Ir HaKodesh V'HaMikdash, who chronicles the whole history and debate between Rabbi Yaakov Rav and Rabbi Levi ibn Chaviv. The main reason smicha did not take off is because shortly after it was reinstated, because of the Muslims, the Chachamim in Sfas themselves were scattered, and they no longer had Roiv Chachmei Yisrael in one Makom. So anyway, this is a machlokes that's rooted here in Salonica. Both Rabbi Levi ibn Chaviv and the Beis Yosef and Rabbi Yaakov Barav all at some point in time flourished here in Salonica. Yehi Zichram Baruch. Thank you very much.
Sorry.
No problem. We got this. We got the main thing in.
Yeah.
But it's not. It's still okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to share with you now a mystery, a short mystery. I don't know the answer to this question. We have eminent Talmidei Chachamim on the trip. Yoidei Sefer, Go'onim, Chachamim, Nevoinim, Kulam Yoidim Es HaTorah. Maybe you could help me answer this great mystery. We spoke about it in private conversation, but I want to highlight and drive home how difficult the question is. We know that one of the all-time great travelers, there are many great Jewish travelers in history. You have Rav Ashturi HaParchi, one of the Rishonim, a Talmud of the Rosh, who records the geography and topography of Eretz Yisrael. He wrote a Sefer Kafter V'Ferach. You have Benjamin of Tudela, who also recorded the happenings of the ancient Jewish communities in the times of the Rishonim. In more recent times, you have somebody, Rabbi Yosef Schwartz. Rabbi Yosef Schwartz, who wrote Tvuas Haaretz. He was, the Zmanim in Eretz Yisrael are largely due to the research that he did traveling up to various mountains to see the times of Hanetzachama and so forth. But perhaps the greatest of all the Jewish travelers was the Chida, Reb Chaim Yosef David Azulai. On 2 occasions, the Chida traveled for more than 5 years. He went as west as Tunisia. He was as north as London and Amsterdam. On each trip, he covered something like 130 cities. There is no major Jewish community that the Chida did not visit. And when the Chida visited a community, he visited the libraries. He tried to come into encounter all the manuscripts he could get a hold of. He visited museums. He went to museums of natural science. He went to monuments. He went to Versailles. He went to the Tower of London. Mysteriously, there's one city the Chida never visited. This is a city that perhaps was the epicenter of Torah scholarship, at least from 1492 to 1590, and even to more recent times. It was one of the 2 major centers of publishing in the Jewish world, along with Constantinople, along with Venice. Salonica was the epicenter of Torah. And some reason, the Chida never made it to Salonica. not in round 1 and not in round 2. Why would that have been? Was there no manuscript that interested the Chida in Salonica? Was there no site that the Chida wanted to see? What was it about Salonica that the Chida never came here? Many of the Chachamim recorded in the Shem HaGdolim hailed from Salonica. Rabbi Yosef Taitachek, Rav Shmuel Dimodina, the Marashdam. We spoke on Shabbos, Rav Shlomo Al-Kabitz, the Beis Yosef. Salonica was steeped in Jewish history, Jewish scholarship, and many places that you would have thought would have been of interest to the Chida. So the great mystery is, maybe you know, maybe you could speak to someone, maybe you could ask someone, call up your people, speak to your people. I'm sure you have, well-connected people who know something. Why did the Chida never come to Salonica? Okay, that's what I got for you right now. Enjoy a few moments before you hear from me again.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for your kind attention. Veria is a very historic city. This is a very historic location. The community here dates back more than 2,000 years, or approximately 2,000 years. Actually, at first, in Veria, when Paul came to this area, he lectured right here. So, now, I want to bring to your attention an amazing tshuva that was written by the Dvar Shmuel. You may not have heard of the Dvar Shmuel. The Dvar Shmuel is Rav Moshe Amrilio. Rav Moshe Amrilio was the Rav of Salonica in the beginning of the 18th century. He was born in 1696. He was nifter in 1745. He wrote Shalos Tshuvas Dvar Moshe. He wrote a parish on the Rambam Halacha Moshe, and he wrote Drasha Sal Torah Yad Moshe. Rav Moshe Amrilio. In the aftermath of Shabtai Tzvi, from 1680 to 1720, many Jews in Veria converted to Islam. Right here. From 1680 to 1720, many Jews converted to Islam. Now, their wives did not necessarily convert. And the question is, what happens to the marriage? So there's a historic tshuva in the Dvar Shmuel that these men are required to divorce their wives. They cannot practice a different religion and stay married to Jewish women. So this Shalos Tshuvas Dvar Shmuel, right here in Veria, where the community, the men who converted to Islam, were forced to divorce their wives. Now I just want you to think about that. When we mentioned the Chida did not come to Salonica, this area was a hotbed not only of Sabbateanism. We're talking about Sabbateanism after Shabtai Tzvi. We're talking about Sabbateanism after Shabtai Tzvi converted. We're talking about Jews converting in large numbers in the aftermath of Shabtai Tzvi right here. And the historic tshuva of the Dvar Shmuel, the Rabbi of Salonica, was written about this community. There's another halachic issue that came up regarding neficha. Neficha means blowing up lungs to be able to check it for trephos. That's another tshuva written by the Dvar Shmuel, Rav Shmuel Amrilio, Shalos Tshuvas Dvar Shmuel. So in this historic location, it's worthwhile to remember what happened in our history. Thank you very much. Okay, Rabbi Sai, one last missing piece about Salonica, so we could close the book on Salonica. I want to speak about one of the greatest leaders of Salonican Jewry. You're all familiar with one of the Svarim that this individual wrote, Rabbi Yaakov ibn Chaviv. On Shabbos we spoke about the Mahalbach. Now we're going to speak about his father, Rabbi Yaakov ibn Chaviv. He comes from Zamora, Spain. He's born in 1445. He's a Talmud driver. He's born in 1445. Nahag. He's a Talmud of Rav Shmuel of Valencia. He has to flee Spain in 1492. He comes to Portugal. As we mentioned on Shabbos, in 1497, they made a law in Portugal that all children would be forcibly kidnapped and baptized. Rabbi Yaakov ibn Chaviv's beloved son, Rabbi Levi ibn Chaviv, a young boy, already a promising Torah scholar, was kidnapped by the church, and the Mahalbach, as a young boy, was baptized. Many are not aware. Actually, in the Kuntras HaSmicha, somebody attacked Rabbi Levi, and he mentioned the Shoyal made a veiled remark alluding to something shady in Reb Levi's past. And Reb Levi, the Malbach, responded in a forthright manner. He said, look, even if they changed my name during the period of conversion, I did not change. Mi shaboichein libai. The Rebbeinu Shalom knows that I always feared him, even though I didn't have the zechus to be Mekadeshim Shemayim. In my heart, I always feared Hashem. In other words, the Mahalbach had no choice. It's not that they gave him a choice whether to give up his life or not. He was forcibly baptized. Now his father comes to Greece, and just to get a little bit of the backdrop, Greece was part of Turkey at the time. The Minhagim in Greece followed the ancient community of Turkey, meaning they practice Sephardic custom. They practice Turkish custom. Rabbi Yaakov is coming from Spain. His minhag was minhag Sephardi. Now, let's see if you know, who is more machmir legabe achilas basar, Ashkenazim or Sephardim? What? Meaning you have no idea, right? The Sephardim are much, much more machmir by basar. All halachas basar than Ashkenazim are. There are many kulos Ashkenazim rely on. When real shchitas beis Yosef is much more chamor than what the regular meat that we eat. Even the highest level of kashrus of meat of Bnei Ashkenaz is not up to the standards of shchitas beis Yosef. So Rabbi Yaakov comes here, and the ancient community basically were lenient and they followed minhag Ashkenaz. His community back in Spain were machmir, like the chumras of the beis Yosef legabe treifos, and he paskined that they do not continue to observe their chumras of Spain. Why? You're noye ka'anshe mekoymai. If you come to a new place, you do not keep the practices of your old country. You're noye kaminag mekoymai. That was from Rabbi Yaakov ibn Chabiv. Now, the Turkish community is led by Rabbi Yosef Taitchik and his student, Rabbi Shmuel Dimodina. But they respected Rabbi Yaakov ibn Chabiv greatly. So, in other words, Rabbi Yaakov ibn Chabiv led the Sephardic community, and Rabbi Yosef Taitchik and Marashtam, they led the Turkish community. Rabbi Yaakov's magnum opus is something called Ein Yaakov. Ein Yaakov is a collection of all the Agadatas, but many are not aware that Rabbi Yaakov ibn Chabiv attempted to collect all the Agadatas of Shas and Yerushalmi. He did not get around to doing all of Yerushalmi because it seems that many volumes of Yerushalmi were not available. Furthermore, Rabbi Yaakov ibn Chabiv only completed Ein Yaakov on Zram and Moed. He never did Nashim, Nazikin, Kachim, and Taros. That was completed by his son, Rav Levi ibn Chabiv. Rav Levi ibn Chabiv completed the majority of the Ein Yaakov. The plan of Rabbi Yaakov ibn Chabiv was to create an index of 12 major subjects, so that people, if they wanted to find an Agadata, let's say on Torah, on Chesed, on Shalom, he was going to divide the Agadatas of Shas into 12 main categories. Furthermore, he wanted to make an index so that if somebody was learning, let's say, Parshas Matos, they could find any Agadata related to Matos. He was going to create a mafteach to help use the Agadatas of Shas and connect it with the Parshas HaShavua. He never got around to it. Now, he also wrote, many don't realize this, a Peirush on the Ein Yaakov. You know what it's called? Ion Yaakov. Wrong. Ion Yaakov was written by the Shvus Yaakov, Rabbi Yaakov Reisher. He wrote a Peirush called HaKoisev. HaKoisev is Rabbi Yaakov ibn Chabiv. HaKoisev is a collection of Rashi, Tosfos that we no longer have. The Rashba, the Ran, the Ritva. The Ein Yaakov became such a popular sefer. Many Mefarshim were written on it. For example, Ion Yaakov. And the Haboina. Did you ever see Haboina? Haboina is written by none other than Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi of Medina. It is considered a classic Peirush on the Ion Yaakov. So as mentioned, he did not complete the work. He only wrote Zram and Moed. The rest of it was completed by Rabbi Levi ibn Chabiv. Rabbi Yaakov is also the author of a Peirush on the Torah, which I don't think we have, but the Beis Yosef himself quotes the commentary of Rabbi Yaakov ibn Chabiv. So hopefully we got a little bit of a tam, a little bit of a flavor for the nature of the community in Salonica. There was an ancient Turkish community that was led by Rabbi Yosef Taitachik with Marashdam. There was a Sephardic community led by Rabbi Yaakov ibn Chaviv. Ultimately, his son, who we mentioned, was forcibly baptized. How did he get him back? This is a miraculous story. Rabbi Yaakov ibn Chaviv somehow freed and rescued his son from the church and escaped to Salonica. So many great Chachamim hailed from Salonica, and as we mentioned, it was Ir Ve'em B'Yisrael. Rabbi Isai, thank you very much. Good. Okay, just very briefly, thank you for the beautiful presentation. We're now in northwest Greece. If there's any community in the whole country that you could say that has authentic Greek custom, meaning it was not influenced by Sephardic custom. Every other community, the Sephardim came from Spain, and they were so numerous that all the Greek, ancient Greek custom became absorbed among the Sephardim. This is the only area, northwest Greece, bordering on Albania. It's been here for at least 1,300 years that they have Minhag Yanina. Now, what does that mean? What is Minhag Yanina? First of all, you try to make heads or tails what it says on the sign, but this shul is within the walls. There was a breakaway, like all good shuls, there was a breakaway. And the issue of the breakaway is mentioned in Shaus Chuvas Marashtam. So Rav Shmuel Dimodina, it was brought to his attention, could there be a breakaway shul? And because this shul cannot accommodate the new influx from Sicily and from other areas, and from Corfu, he allowed the breakaway. This was under leadership of the Rabbi Yehoshua ben Ezra. Now, I want to share with you just one Minhag Yanina. By Ashkenazim today, the first child, who gets to name the first child? Mother gets it. That's Minhag in most Ashkenazi communities. In Yanina, the first boy is named after the parents of the father. The first girl is named after the parents of the father. The second boy, parents of the mother. Second girl, parents of the mother. So that was the minhag of Yanina. What? No, but not to name after the parent. That's obvious. All Sephardim do that. But the fact that it's number one end of both boy and girl goes to the father, and then second boy and girl goes to the mother. Okay. Oh, we're going to daven mincha now. All our tefillah should be niskabel. Thank you. Okay, Marv Rabbi Isai. We've mentioned a lot of names over the last couple of days. Some of them, maybe when you hear again, you'll remember. Some of them you might remember on your own, and others you may have heard one time, and even if you hear it again, it may not ring a bell. We mentioned the Chida wrote his magnum opus. It's good for background noise. The Chida wrote the Shem HaGdolim. There's a similar work to the Shem HaGdolim, written by the author of the Sifsei Chachamim, Reb Shapsi Bas. And Chsam Sofer in Parshas Vaschanan wonders, what's the value of such a work, where it basically just lists the name of Gedolim and Sfarim. What does that have any Torah value? So Chsam Sofer says a big yisoid. He calls it V'shamata Yisrael V'shamarta La'asais. He says it's a skula, that when you hear the name Yisrael, or you hear the name of a tzaddik, or you hear the name of a sefer, it engenders kedusha. It engenders a ratzon to be mistabek to Hashem. So just hearing the names of tzaddikim, you're much better off than hearing the names of politicians or anybody else. Just to be familiar and to hear names of tzaddikim has a very big effect. Earlier on the bus, we mentioned that when Rabbi Yaakov ibn Chaviv came to Greece, he was the leader of Spanish Jewry, but there were leaders of Turkish Jewry. The main leader of Turkish Jewry, who was he? Do you remember the name? Rav David HaKohen. And we said, we don't really know who's Rav David HaKohen. So sure enough, I found Rav David HaKohen is mentioned in the Shem HaGdolim. And you know where Rav David HaKohen came from? Came from Corfu. So the leader of Greece, of the Grecian community here, aside from the Sephardim, was Rav David HaKohen. He was so early, he was in the time of Rabbi Yoel Mizrahi, he was in the time of Rabbi Yosef Taitachak, but the leader was Rav David HaKohen. Rav David HaKohen is one of, if you make a search in the Shem HaGdolim of Corfu, I think it will only come up one time. Who's from Corfu? Rav David HaKohen. He's the leader of the community from Greece, meaning aside from the Sephardim. So we're on the way to Corfu. You see the mountains, you see the water. We're al haderech le Corfu. We'll be there, Be'ez Hashem, and when we get there, we'll speak about the issues of the etrogim. Okay, that's what I got for you. Okay, we're continuing our Greek tour with Avira Tours 2024. We're here in Corfu. We're overlooking the waters, Adrian Sea. We're overlooking the mountain. And here in Corfu, one of the most controversial halachic subjects is the kashrus of the Corfu etrog. So I want to share with you something very brief. The Rabbi Meir, at the end of his Hagois on Orchaim, writes that the Corfu etrog is not kosher. Why? Because it has a shem lavai. Shem lavai means it has an accompanying name. Accompanying name means it's not called an etrog, it's called etroge Corfu. So anytime, meaning an accompanying name, it's not just an etrog, it's an etrog Corfu. And only by anaf eitz avos, meaning only by anaf eitz avos could it have, let's say by hadassim are allowed to have a shem lavai. But an etrog is not allowed to have a shem lavai, and therefore the Beis Meir says etroge Corfu are not kosher. The Chalkas Yoyev disagreed. Chalkas Yoyev says Corfu etrogim are exactly the same as all other etrogim. Because in Corfu, they're not called etroge Corfu. Why is it called outside of Corfu etroge Corfu? It's just to know where it came from. But that's not the name. The name is only Shem Lavai if it describes a unique type of etrog. And therefore the Chalkas Yoyev said etroge Corfu are kosher. So we'll discuss the status of etrog Corfu more in another spot. Okay, good afternoon everyone. We're driving through the streets of Corfu. So I want to give you some background about one of the important halachic topics that is relevant to Corfu, and that is the etroge Corfu. In 1809, the Corfu etrog became one of the most well-used etrogim throughout the Jewish world. It began to be used in Poland, in Ukraine, in Lithuania, even though the one who came out most vehemently against the Corfu etrog was none other than the Chassam Sofer himself. And the reason why the Chassam Sofer came out against the Corfu etrog is primarily because Chassam Sofer felt, and there's a certain degree of uncertainty about this, but the Chassam Sofer felt that just like kosher birds, even if it meets all the requirements of a kosher animal, nevertheless, if there's no positive Mesorah that the bird is kosher, we don't eat it. The same thing with the Daled Minim. Unless there's a positive Mesorah that the etrog is kosher, even though there's no reason to assume it's pasul. It has a pitum, it has blitos, it has mitz, it has all the qualities of an etrog. But because there was no definitive Mesorah, the Chassam Sofer was roish l'chol hamefakbekim be'etroge Corfu. Even though it began to be used, actually we know that the Corfu etrog was used outside of Poland, even by the Rabbi Yehuda already in 1785. We know that Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Barditchev used the Corfu etrog. Harav HaKadosh Milublin used the Corfu etrog, and that was primarily because there was a war in France, and the avenues of what had been considered until then the premium etrog in the world, which was the Yanava etrog, which came from Calabria, that was no longer available. And now the etrog of choice out of necessity was the Corfu etrog. And as mentioned, the Chassam Sofer came out most vehemently about it for the reason of there was no positive Mesorah. Other Gedolim had different issues with the Corfu etrog. For example, Reb Shlomo Kluger held that there was a shaila, whether about the genealogy, the ancestry of the Corfu etrog, whether there was a shaila of Morkov in the Corfu etrog. Now in halacha, there's a difference between etrog Morkov and an etrog who has harkava in the ancestry. So while an etrog Morkov may be problematic, if there is some admixture in the ancestry, that may be less of an issue. So now, if you want to be able to use the Corfu etrog, you need to take care of basically 5 issues. Number 1, the poskim that allowed the Corfu etrog, they had to show that there's no chashash of harkava. Or, for example, the Beis Ephraim held that even if there is a chashash harkava, the Corfu etrog was still kosher. You needed to show that a Mesorah is not needed for etrogim. And based on the fact that the Rabbi Yehuda used it, and the Rabbi Yitzchak bar Ditchev used it, and the Rav of Lublin used it, that was the basis to be able to use the Corfu etrog. Now, as it is well known, in Chabad, they hold the Yanaver etrog is like one of the Aseret HaDibros. They hold that when Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Har Sinai, Hashem told Moshe to take a Yanaver etrog. That's what they say. So they asked, well, wait a second. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak bar Ditchev used the Corfu etrog, and the Rebbe Rashab said, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak bar Ditchev, everybody knows that a seed from Calabria blew in the wind all the way to Corfu and produced one Yanav etrog here in Corfu. So that's how they were melets. That's how they were mamlets on the Rabbi Levi Yitzchak bar Ditchev using the Corfu etrog. Actually, when the Tzemach Tzedek heard about the Corfu etrog, he said if he would have the capacity, he would take a Corfu etrog, he would wrap it in a talus made by a machine, and he would throw both of them into a fire. In other words, he didn't really appreciate either the machine-made talus or the Corfu etrog. However, it is reported that even though the Chassam Sofer was the first challenger of the Corfu etrog, we have a tshuva, it's printed in Likutei Tshuvas Chassam Sofer, from the Ksav Sofer, who testified on Avua de Shmuel, meaning on his father, that the Chassam Sofer himself took the Corfu etrog and made a bracha on the Corfu etrog. Now, another interesting question that the Beis Meir brings up is, could you use the Corfu etrog? There's a psul by etrogim, and this we mentioned when we were in the fort, of Shem Levai. Shem Levai means, in order for Hadassim to be kosher, it could be called Hadassim, it could be called New Zealand Hadassim, it could be called Flatbush Hadassim. Doesn't matter what it's called. As long as the word Hadas is in there, doesn't matter what name of location is in there. However, a Shem Levai by an etrog is a psul. So the Beis Meir said that the Corfu etrog was pasul because it's called a Corfu etrog. So it has an accompanying name. However, the Chelkas Yoav disagrees with that. And as we mentioned, he writes that the name Corfu is not a descriptive name of the type of etrog that it is, because there's nothing unique about a Corfu etrog. It doesn't look differently, it doesn't smell differently, it doesn't have different belitos. The reason it's called a Corfu etrog is because it comes from Corfu. If the name is there just to indicate what the location is, that would not be a problem with an etrog. Now, I want to share with you, there was a very big movement. By the way, just to share, the Beis Ephraim holds there's no problem with the Corfu etrog in terms of morkav, because any time there's a location that has a major etrog industry, the Beis Meir holds chazaka uman loimariam nosai. You can rely on a chazaka that any location that has an industry of etrogim, that there's a chazaka that it's not morkav. However, there is a major movement only to use etrogim that come from Eretz Yisrael, even though, by the way, the etrogim that came from Eretz Yisrael, I don't even like to say this. I don't even know if you're allowed to say this, but this is what the Gedolim said, so I'm going with it. Even though the etrogim of Eretz Yisrael were not as aesthetically as beautiful as the Corfu etrog, nevertheless, there was a big movement that where the etrogei Eretz Yisrael were available, that should be used primarily. So, for example, Rav Shmuel Heller, the Rav in Tzfas, testified that the etrogim that come from in the vicinity of Tzfas are muchzik b'kashrusan, and therefore you should dafka take etrogim that come from Eretz Yisrael. Reb Chaim Falaji said, even though Reb Chaim Falaji says there's a chazaka that the etrogim in Eretz Yisrael are not morkavim. Avnei Nezer writes, Reb Chaim Siman Tov Pei Daled, Yesh lahader likach etrog Eretz Yisrael af she'enoi na kolkach kishar etrogim kugoin Corfu. So the Avnei Nezer says that etrogim in Corfu are more beautiful than the ones in Eretz Yisrael. But nevertheless, it's still more ideal to take an etrog from Corfu. Rabbi Yitzchak Elchanan also says, better to take etrogim from Eretz Yisrael. By the way, The Aruch HaShulchan has the following lashon, a wondrous lashon. Zok the Aruch HaShulchan. Better, he says, chas v'shalom, to take pre-ben hasnua al esroige ben ho'ahuva. It's a play on words on the pasuk in Kiseitze. The esrogim of Eretz Yisrael are bnei ahuva. The esrogim in Chutz Haaretz are bnei snua. It doesn't matter where they come from. The bottom line is that most poskim gave preference to esrog Eretz Yisrael. In fact, Shailus Teshuvas Tirosh v'Yitzhar finds a remez in the pasuk not to take daled minim that come from anywhere other than Eretz Yisrael. The pasuk says, Imlai ala es Yerushalayim al Rosh Simchasi, on the Yom Tov of Sukkot, which is Rosh Simchasi. Imlai ala es Yerushalayim, ala es Rashi Tevois, Esrog, Arava, Lulav, Hadas. So there's no question that even if you're going to say that the Esrog, Corfu are kosher, as we have Eidos, Chassam Sofer himself used it out of necessity, and many poskim say that there's no issue of Harkava. Nevertheless, the Esroige Eretz Yisrael would be always Adif. So that's some background on the Esroigim of Corfu. Thank you.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.